Hello and welcome to The Tired Thinker, a quiet corner where ideas stretch out slowly and thought has room to breathe. Tonight's reflection drifts towards something vast, subtle, and strangely familiar. Time. It's the rhythm in your heartbeat, the reason days pass and seasons turn, and the quiet current carrying every memory you've ever made. We rarely pause to notice it, and yet it shapes all of us. From the growth of forests and the rise of civilizations, to the blink of your eyes and the pace of your thoughts. Before we wander deeper into this patient mystery, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what hour is it right now, in your corner of the clock? It's curious, isn't it? A reflection on time. And here we are, scattered across the world, experiencing it together, in the same moment. If this gentle thinking feels like a rest you've been needing, or if you're just here to soften your mind at the end of a long day, I'd be so grateful if you tapped like or quietly subscribed. It helps this tired little channel reach others who might need a slower space for thought too. Now, let's begin. Catch-22 is a phrase that describes a no-win dilemma. It is a situation where rules cancel each other out and leave you trapped. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22, set during World War II. In the book, a bomber pilot named Yossarian wants to stop flying dangerous combat missions. The military rule, called Catch-22, states that a soldier can be grounded if he is insane. But if a soldier requests to be grounded, that act proves he is sane. To want to save your own life is rational. So the request is denied, and the soldier must keep flying. If he does not request discharge, he cannot be declared insane without asking. Either way, he remains in combat. That is the essence of a catch-22, a closed circle of logic with no way out. The idea has spread far beyond the novel. People now use it to describe many situations. You may face a catch-22 when applying for a job. Employers want experience. But to gain experience, you need the job. Or consider credit. Banks lend to people with good credit, but you need a loan to build that record. With no history, you cannot borrow, and without borrowing, you cannot create history. Each side blocks the other. Bureaucracy is full of catch-22s. A patient may need a diagnosis to receive treatment, but cannot get the diagnosis without access to treatment first. A person may need an address to apply for housing aid, but needs housing to have an address. Each rule looks reasonable alone, but combined, they form a locked system. This is what makes the phrase powerful. It is not only about difficulty, but about futility. The very act of trying to solve the problem becomes proof that you cannot solve it. That is why people feel such frustration when they describe something as a catch-22. The military setting in Heller's novel sharpens the point. War places people where survival feels urgent but unreachable. Yossarian's attempt to avoid danger becomes the reason he must keep facing it. That cruel twist mirrors the way real rules can clash. Systems meant to create order sometimes produce loops that strip away choice. Think of unemployment benefits. To qualify, a person may need to prove they are available for work. Yet, they may be out of work precisely because they are unable, due to illness, lack of transport, or other barriers. The rule demands readiness, but the cause of unemployment prevents it. The person is disqualified for the very reason they applied. Students also run into these loops. Some programs require prior coursework, but the courses are only available once admitted. Or a scholarship may require enrollment, while enrollment depends on receiving the scholarship. Each path depends on the other, leaving no entry point. In law, the same pattern appears. A person may need to appear in court to challenge an unfair restriction, yet the restriction itself prevents attendance. The logic protects itself rather than the individual. These dilemmas are not simple obstacles. An obstacle may be overcome with effort or creativity. A catch-22 is different because the system blocks itself. The more you try to comply, the more you prove that compliance is impossible. For example, if a city requires proof of employment to issue a work permit, but employers require the permit before hiring, an applicant is shut out. The structure feeds its own impossibility. That is why the phrase endures. People see these loops in governments, corporations, schools, hospitals, and daily life. It is not just about war or bureaucracy. It reflects how human systems can fold back on themselves. Immigration often shows the same trap. A person may need legal status to apply for residency, but must apply for residency to gain legal status. Mental health treatment can work the same way. A patient may need stability for a job, but must show employment to access the insurance that pays for treatment. Each side demands the other first. Technology has its own versions. A new app may need users to attract investors, but needs investors to reach users. A website may need content to draw visitors, but relies on visitors to inspire creators to contribute content. The cycle stalls until an outside factor breaks it. Even in relationships, the pattern appears. One person may want trust before sharing openly, but trust only grows when both people begin to share. Each side waits and nothing happens. While not life-threatening like Yossarian's missions, the loop feels familiar. The common feature is that all paths are blocked by the very conditions that define them. The word paradox comes close, but catch-22 adds the personal weight of being trapped. A paradox can remain abstract. A catch-22 is lived. Joseph Heller chose the number 22 at random. Earlier drafts used other numbers, but the publisher preferred 22. That arbitrariness adds to the absurdity. A meaningless number defines a soldier's fate. In real life, rules may also be created without malice, yet still bind people in harmful loops. People sometimes use the term loosely. They might say, "It's a catch-22 that my car broke down and I can't get to work." That is not quite right. A broken car is an obstacle, not a closed circle of logic. A better example is the job hunt, where needing experience and needing a job block each other in a loop. Understanding this distinction matters. A catch-22 is not frustrating because it is difficult, but because it is impossible under its own terms. That impossibility is what gives the phrase its force. When someone calls a problem a catch-22, they point not only to struggle, but to futility itself. The phrase has become part of everyday language because people recognize the pattern. They see it in offices, hospitals, courts, and homes. And when they name it, they remind themselves that logic, when twisted back on itself, can trap as much as it explains. The Monty Hall problem is a puzzle about probability, named after Monty Hall, the host of the American game show Let's Make a Deal. A contestant stands before 3 closed doors. Behind one door is a car. Behind the other 2 are goats. The goal is to pick the door that hides the car. At the start, the contestant chooses one of the 3 doors. Without opening it, Monty, who knows what is behind each door, opens one of the other 2 doors to reveal a goat. Now 2 doors remain unopened, the one the contestant picked and the other unopened door. Monty then asks, "Do you want to stay with your choice or switch to the other door?" Most people feel the choice makes no difference. 2 doors remain, one with the car and one with a goat, which seems like 50-50. But the math shows otherwise. If the contestant switches, the odds of winning rise to 2 out of 3. If the contestant stays, the odds remain 1 out of 3. At the beginning, the contestant has a 1 in 3 chance of picking the car and a 2 in 3 chance of picking a goat. If the first choice was the car, staying wins. That outcome has a 1 in 3 chance. If the first choice was a goat, which is twice as likely, switching wins. Nothing Monty does changes those original odds. Imagine repeating the game 100 times. About 33 contestants will pick the car first. For them, staying wins. About 67 will pick a goat. For them, switching wins. Switching pays off about twice as often as staying. Monty's role is key. He never opens the winning door. He always reveals a goat. That act gives information. The contestant is more likely to have picked a goat at the start. By showing one of the other goats, Monty makes the remaining unopened door carry the stronger odds. Picture 3 cases. If the car is behind door 1 and you chose door 1, Monty opens another door to show a goat. Staying wins, switching loses. If the car is behind door 2 and you chose door 1, Monty opens door 3. Staying loses, switching wins. If the car is behind door 3, Monty opens door 2. Staying loses, switching wins. In 2 of the 3 cases, switching wins. The trap is believing that once Monty opens a door, the odds reset. It feels like the game restarts with 2 doors and 1 prize. But Monty's choice is not random. He never opens the car. That rule shifts the odds. The 1/3 chance of your first pick stays on your door. The 2/3 chance transfers to the single unopened door Monty leaves alone. This problem gained fame when it appeared in a magazine column in 1990. Readers sent thousands of letters, many insisting the answer was wrong. Even mathematicians argued against it. The result clashed with intuition. But computer simulations, repeated thousands of times, confirmed it. Switching won about 2/3 of the time. You can test this with cards. Take 3, mark one with a star, shuffle them, and lay them face down. Pick one. Have someone reveal a losing card from the others. Then decide to stay or switch. Repeat many times. The pattern will be clear. Switching wins about twice as often. The Monty Hall problem shows how human intuition struggles with probability. We like to see 2 doors and assume even odds, but probability depends on the rules of the process. Monty's knowledge and his action of always showing a goat change the outcome. A variation makes this clearer. Suppose Monty opened a door at random without knowing where the car was. Sometimes he might reveal the car and end the game. In that version, if he revealed a goat, the odds would be 50-50. The difference lies in Monty's knowledge. In the real game, his guarantee of showing a goat makes switching the stronger choice. Another way to picture it is to expand the game. Imagine 100 doors. Behind one is a car. Behind 99 are goats. You pick one door. Your chance of being right is 1 in 100. Now Monty, who knows where the car is, opens 98 goat doors. 2 doors remain, your original and one other. Almost everyone would switch. Your first pick had only a 1% chance. The remaining unopened door now carries the other 99%. The 3-door version feels harder to see, but the principle is the same. The odds always favor the door you did not choose. Monty's reveal focuses those odds on a single alternative. What makes the Monty Hall problem enduring is that it exposes the gap between how probability feels and how it works. People resist switching because it feels like abandoning their choice. They imagine Monty's reveal creates a fresh start. In truth, the odds were skewed from the beginning. Even experienced statisticians have admitted they struggled with the puzzle at first. It highlights how easily judgment falters under uncertainty. We trust gut instinct rather than careful reasoning. The Monty Hall problem reminds us that outcomes depend on the process, and how information is revealed matters as much as the choices themselves. Similar situations appear in daily life. You may make a choice early and feel loyal to it, even when new evidence points elsewhere. Investments, hiring decisions, and personal commitments can all reflect the same structure. The problem teaches that when rules and information interact, intuition may fail, and the better choice can be the one that feels less natural. The Monty problem is a reminder that what looks like a coin flip may hide deeper structure. The car is never in equal balance between the two remaining doors. It rests with the path of choices and the rules that guide the reveal. The ship of Theseus is an old puzzle about identity and change. The story comes from ancient Greece. Theseus was a hero who sailed on a ship that became famous. According to legend, the people of Athens preserved his ship for generations. When a plank rotted, they replaced it. Over time, every piece of wood was replaced. The question is simple. When all the parts are new, is it still the same ship? At first, the answer seems easy. If the ship still floats, looks the same, and carries the name the Ship of Theseus, then it must be the same ship. But the more you think about it, the harder the question becomes. If none of the original wood remains, in what sense can it be called the same? Imagine a car you own. Over the years, you replace the tires, brakes, battery, and lights. No one doubts it is still your car. Now imagine replacing the engine, the doors, and the seats. Most people would still say it is the same car. But what if you go further? Suppose you replace every part until nothing of the original car remains. You still drive it, and it still has your license plate. But is it the same car you first bought, or a new car that has taken its place? The Ship of Theseus forces us to ask, what makes something itself? Is it the material, the form and function, or the history, the story we tell about it? Each answer leads to different results. If identity comes from material, then the ship is not the same. Once the last plank is gone, the original is gone. If identity comes from form and function, then it is the same. The arrangement and purpose remain even if the matter changes. If identity comes from history, then continuity is enough. As long as the ship was repaired step by step, it remains Theseus's ship. Philosophers have argued about this for centuries. The puzzle grows sharper with a twist. Suppose someone gathers the old planks as they are removed and rebuilds a ship from them. Now, there are two ships. One has the shape and use of the original, but new materials. The other has the original materials, but was rebuilt later. Which one is the true ship of Theseus? If the ship made of old planks is the real one, then the repaired ship is only a copy. If the repaired ship is the real one, then the rebuilt version is not. Some even suggest both could be true. But that would mean identity can split. The puzzle is not only about ships. It touches human life. Our bodies replace cells constantly. Skin cells last a few weeks. Blood cells last a few months. Bones renew over years. After a decade, most of the matter in your body has been replaced. If identity depended on material, you would not be the same person you were 10 years ago. Yet we treat ourselves as continuous. We keep our names, our memories, and our sense of self. The same puzzle appears in objects we value. Think of an old family chair. If a leg breaks and is replaced, it remains the family chair. If the seat is replaced, it still counts. If in time every part is replaced, does it remain the heirloom? For many, the story matters more than the material. It is the same chair because it has always belonged to the family. Museums face this with artifacts. A violin from the 18th century may have had its strings, bridge, or even major wooden pieces replaced. Yet it is still described as the same instrument. People care about the lineage, not just the wood. The Ship of Theseus question appears in every restoration. Technology gives another example. Consider a computer. You replace the hard drive Add memory, swap the power supply, even change the case. At some point, nothing remains of the first machine, yet you may still call it your computer. If you reassembled the original parts, you might also claim that is your computer. Which one is true? Identity can rest on function. A hammer is a hammer because it drives nails. Replace the handle and it still drives nails. Replace the head and it still drives nails. Even if both are replaced, the function defines it. In this view, the ship of Theseus remains the same, as long as it works as Theseus's ship. Identity can also rest on continuity. You are the same person you were as a child, not because you have the same matter, but because your life has been one continuous chain. The ship of Theseus, repaired plank by plank, maintains continuity. The rebuilt ship of discarded planks does not, because its story was broken. Others argue identity is a matter of language. The puzzle troubles us because we expect the word same to mean one thing, but we use it in many ways. Sometimes it means material sameness, sometimes functional sameness, sometimes historical sameness. The ship of Theseus shows how those meanings can conflict. Picture a town clock tower. The face is replaced, the gears are replaced, the hands are replaced. Tourists still say that is the same clock tower. They mean the tower that has always stood in the square. If someone reassembles the old pieces elsewhere, locals may say, that is not our clock tower. They mean the one with continuous history, not the one built from parts. The puzzle even appears in law. If a ship is insured and it is repaired until no original parts remain, does the policy still cover it? If the old planks are used to build another, could two owners claim the same rights? The law demands clear answers, but the puzzle shows how slippery identity can be. Digital life raises similar questions. If you back up a file, erase the original, and restore it later, is it the same file? The bits are new, but the content and continuity make us treat it as identical. In this sense, the ship of Theseus lives in our devices as much as in old philosophy. Personal identity brings the issue home. People change beliefs, habits, and even personalities. The person you were at 15 may feel like a stranger, yet you remain linked through memory and story. Just as the ship gains its identity from continuous repair, you gain yours from continuous living. The ship of Theseus endures because it resists a single answer. If you focus on matter, the ship changes. If you focus on form, it remains. If you focus on story, it continues until history breaks. The puzzle reveals the many ways we define sameness and how easily those definitions pull apart. The twin paradox is a story about time and special relativity. Two twins start the same age. One stays on Earth. The other flies a round trip in a fast spaceship. When the traveling twin comes home, that twin has aged less. The effect grows large when the ship nears the speed of light. People call it a paradox because it looks like symmetry should hold. Each twin sees the other moving. So why does only one end up younger? The answer lies in how motion, time dilation, and frames of reference work. Special relativity says the speed of light, labeled c, is the same for all observers who move at steady speeds in straight lines. Physicists call such observers inertial. When two inertial observers move relative to each other, each sees the other's clock tick slow. This is time dilation. The slowdown is set by the Lorentz factor, written gamma. It equals 1 divided by the square root of 1 minus v squared by c squared, where v is the relative speed. At walking pace, gamma is almost 1, so the effect is tiny. At 0.8 c, gamma is about 1.67, which is big enough to notice. Now set up the trip. Call the Earth twin Leah and the traveler Max. They start together. Max leaves in a ship that cruises at 0.8 c. After some time, Max turns around and comes back at the same speed. The turnaround is key. Max must slow, reverse, and speed up again. That change means Max does not stay in one inertial frame for the whole trip. Leah does. Special relativity treats their paths through space-time differently. Suppose Leah measures 15 years between goodbye and reunion. With v equals 0.8 c, gamma is approximately 1.67. Max's ship clock runs slow by that factor while coasting. During those lengths, the ship records only 15 divided by 1.67, approximately 9 years of proper time. Proper time is the time measured by a clock that moves with the traveler. Max comes home about 9 years older, while Leah aged 15. The gap is 6 years. Change the speed or distance, and the size of the gap changes too. The paradox feeling comes from symmetry. If each sees the other moving, why doesn't each see the other age less in the end? The fix comes when we consider frames and acceleration. Leah stays in one inertial frame. Max does not. The turnaround breaks the symmetry. The trip is not the same for both. Picture it on a space-time diagram. Time runs upward. Space runs sideways. Leah's life is a straight vertical line. Max's life is a long V-shape. Out, turn, back. The length of a path in space-time is not like length on a map. The straight inertial path gives the most proper time between two events. The kinked path records less. Leah's straight world line gives more time than Max's bent one. Relativity of simultaneity also matters. Different inertial frames slice now across space differently. When Max turns around, the slice of Earth time Max calls now jumps forward. On the outbound leg, Max sees Leah aging slow. On the inbound leg, Max sees Leah aging fast. When Max adds them, the fast part outweighs the slow part. That matches the 6-year gap. The acceleration itself does not make Max younger. The frame change shifts which Earth events Max calls simultaneous. A signal version makes this concrete. Suppose each twin sends a light flash once per year of their own time. On the outbound leg, Leah sees Max's flashes arrive slow because of time dilation and Doppler shift. She gets only a few. On the inbound leg, they arrive fast and she gets more. Max sees the mirror pattern. At reunion, they compare flashes and find that Leah received more. That agrees with the proper time and space-time path story. Different views, same outcome. Nature shows the same every day. Muons are particles created high in the atmosphere. At rest, a muon decays in a fraction of a second. Many rush toward Earth near sea. In Earth's frame, their clocks run slow, so they live long enough to reach the ground. In the muon's frame, the clock runs normal, but the atmosphere is length contracted, so the trip is shorter. Both frames agree on the count of muons at the ground. Engineers must handle the effect too. Atomic clocks on satellites tick at different rates than clocks on Earth. Special relativity makes moving satellite clocks run slow. General relativity makes clocks in weaker gravity run fast. GPS systems must apply both corrections. Without them, errors would grow by kilometers each day. Some ask if acceleration itself explains the paradox. Special relativity handles constant speeds, and the turnaround involves forces. Do we need general relativity to explain the age gap? No. Treat the acceleration periods as brief compared to the long coasting. The total difference comes from the inertial legs. You can also compute the proper time along any curved path by adding small pieces. The math still shows that the straight inertial path between the same start and finish gives the most proper time. Acceleration marks the frame change. It does not create the whole effect. We can even avoid acceleration. Max could transfer from an outbound ship to an inbound ship at the distant point without turning. Each ship moves inertially. The handoff changes Max's frame without forces. When Max gets home, the age gap with Leah is the same. This shows the cause is not the physical jolt of turning, but the fact that Max's path is not one inertial frame from start to end. Try a longer trip. Suppose the destination star is 12 light-years away in Earth's frame. Max flies at 0.8 c. Outbound takes 15 years in Leah's frame. Inbound another 15, for 30 total. With gamma approximately 1.67, Max records 9 years each way, 18 total. At reunion, Leah is 30 years older, Max is 18. The gap is 12 years. If the speed rises to 0.9 c, gamma approximately 2.29, and the gap grows further. From Max's view, the distance to the star is shorter due to length contraction. The 12 light-years shrink by the same factor that slows the clock. The ship sees a shorter trip time that matches the slow ticking. That keeps the account consistent. On each leg, Max still sees Leah's clock run slow. The sudden change comes at the frame switch, when simultaneity shifts. That is where Leah's age jumps forward in Max's reckoning. Gravity adds more wrinkles. Clocks deeper in gravity tick slow compared with clocks higher up. That is gravitational time dilation from general relativity. If the trip passes near massive bodies, those effects matter. But for the basic paradox, we can ignore gravity and stay within special relativity. Small versions have been tested. In 1971, scientists flew atomic clocks on jets and compared them with ground clocks. The flying clocks lost time due to speed and gained time due to altitude. The net matched relativity. The difference was only tens of nanoseconds, but it was real. Modern versions with better clocks see the same signs with more precision. The paradox name sounds strong, but the logic is sound. Moving clocks run slow relative to the frame in which they move. Proper time is the time a traveler measures along a path in spacetime. The straight inertial path between the same start and finish gives the most proper time. A change of frame changes which distant events line up with your now. With these ideas, the story holds together. You can bring it closer to daily life. Imagine two people born on the same day. One stays in town, the other travels the world at high speed and comes back. Their calendars show different counts of days for the same stretch of history. In relativity, that is not just a feeling, but a fact. The path through spacetime decides how much time a clock records. The twins embody that idea with their own lives. Writers sometimes use extreme numbers. They send one twin near a black hole or push a ship to 0.999 c. The math scales as promised, but the lesson already shows in the 0.8 c trip. The traveling twin changes frames. The stay-at-home twin does not. Whether you use time dilation, Doppler shifts, simultaneity, or space-time paths, you reach the same reunion scene. One twin has more birthdays than the other. The gap is no illusion. It is a count on real clocks that meet again in the same place. Moving the goalposts is a tactic where the requirements for success keep changing. Each time someone meets the conditions, the standards shift. What seemed acceptable yesterday no longer qualifies today. The person using this strategy gains control by making the target chase approval that never comes. The rules are unstable, leaving the target uncertain, exhausted, and dependent on whoever redefines the terms. In the workplace, an employee might be told that finishing a project by Friday will prove readiness for promotion. They work hard, deliver on time, and expect recognition. Instead, the manager says the real test is taking on another client. Once that is done, the manager insists the true measure of leadership is managing a team. The cycle repeats. The employee never hears, "You've succeeded." Each step only unlocks another requirement. Approval dangles just out of reach. Parents sometimes do this without realizing. A child brings home a test with a grade of 90, expecting praise. The parent replies, "Why not 95?" When the child achieves a 95, the response shifts to, "Why not 100?" The message is that nothing is ever good enough. The child internalizes that approval depends on surpassing an ever-rising standard. Over time, achievements lose their meaning, and self-doubt grows. In relationships, the same pattern appears. One partner says, "I'll feel secure if you call me every night." The other agrees and does it. Soon the demand shifts. "Calling isn't enough. I need you to text me during the day." Once that is met, it changes again. "Stop talking to certain friends." What began as a clear request becomes a string of escalating demands. The partner on the receiving end works harder for reassurance, but the goalposts keep moving. The relationship turns into a cycle of control rather than mutual respect. In negotiations, moving the goalposts is often deliberate. Suppose two companies finalize contract terms. One side delivers as agreed, but the other adds new demands. Lower prices, faster delivery, extra features. Each time the supplier thinks they had satisfied the requirements, the buyer raises the bar. This wears down resistance and pressures the supplier into worse terms. The buyer gains leverage by never letting the other side feel finished. Cult leaders rely heavily on this tactic. Recruits are told enlightenment comes after certain practices. Once completed, the leader insists true progress requires deeper sacrifice or stricter obedience. The follower never reaches the promised destination. They always feel just short of worthy, trapped in endless striving. The leader keeps them dependent by ensuring they never cross the finish line. Sports can also illustrate the tactic. A player is told they must run a certain distance to prove fitness. Once they achieve it, the coach raises the target. The next time, another drill is added. The player soon learns approval will not come, no matter the effort. While discipline is essential in training, shifting expectations without recognition damages motivation. Athletes may burn out when effort never results in acknowledgement. In politics, the tactic appears in debate. A politician may demand proof of a claim. When proof is provided, they say it is not enough and ask for something else. If new evidence arrives, they change the demand again. It looks like reasoned skepticism, but in reality, no amount of proof will satisfy them. The standard is designed to be unreachable. Marketing exploits the same principle. A company might present a product as exclusive, saying only select customers qualify. Once someone meets the first condition, they are told they must spend more, join a club, or complete another step to belong. Each requirement feels like progress, but keeps the consumer hooked. The promised status never materializes, yet the customer keeps investing more time or money. The tactic works because people are wired to seek closure. Unfinished tasks weigh on the mind. When success seems just one step away, people stay invested, even if the step keeps changing. Casinos exploit this through mere misses. Almost winning convinces players victory is close, so they keep playing. Moving the goalposts manipulates the same impulse. The target believes the next achievement will secure recognition, but it never does. Over time, this erodes confidence. A person subjected to shifting standards starts questioning their own ability. They might think, maybe I'm not doing enough. In truth, the requirements were never meant to be met. The manipulator controls the definition of success. So the target keeps chasing without catching up. Take a student applying to graduate school. An advisor says publishing one article will strengthen the application. The student publishes only to be told they now need 2. After that, they must present at conferences, then write grants, then gain teaching credits. The list expands endlessly. By the time the student realizes, years have been spent trying to satisfy moving standards that were never clearly defined. Another example is found in workplaces that make promises about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Leadership may say promotions will come once candidates meet specific criteria. When those criteria are met, the bar shifts again, citing unspoken expectations. Progress never results in recognition. The shifting goalposts protect those already in power and discourage those trying to advance. The tactic is subtle. The manipulator rarely admits they are changing the rules. Each new demand is framed as logical, necessary, or part of the process. The target may not realize the pattern until exhaustion sets in. By then, they are often too invested to step away. People also use moving the goalposts to avoid admitting fault. If someone promises to be satisfied after a condition is met, then shifts the requirement, they never have to say, "Yes, that worked." By refusing to close the loop, they maintain control. Acknowledgement would signal an end. Moving the standard keeps the other party bound in a cycle. This tactic thrives in imbalanced power dynamics. When one side depends on approval, the other side can exploit that dependency by redefining what approval means. The actual standards may be arbitrary. What matters is that they are never fixed. Over time, the target often lowers their expectations. Instead of seeking fairness, they settle for occasional scraps of recognition. The manipulator may then grant rare praise, which feels amplified because it is so scarce. This creates a reinforcement loop. A single kind word feels like a major reward, even though the larger pattern remains frustrating. Across workplaces, families, relationships, politics, business, education, or religion, the pattern is the same. Success is never acknowledged because acknowledgement would end the manipulator's leverage. By keeping approval just out of reach, the manipulator maintains control. The target's energy goes into proving themselves while the rules shift beyond their grasp. The St. Petersburg Paradox begins with a simple coin toss. Imagine a lottery where a fair coin is flipped until it lands heads. The pot starts at $2. Each time it lands tails, the pot doubles. If the first flip is heads, you win $2. If the first is tails and the second is heads, you win $4. If you get 2 tails before a head, you win $8. The pattern continues without limit. The payoff doubles each round, and the game ends only when a head appears. The expected value of this lottery is the sum of all possible payoffs multiplied by their probabilities. The chance the game ends on the first toss is 1/2, with a payoff of 2. Multiply them, and you get 1. The chance it ends on the second toss is 1/4, with a payoff of 4. Multiply, and you get 1 again. The chance of it ending on the third toss is 1/8, with a payoff of 8, giving 1 yet again. This pattern continues forever. Each outcome contributes 1, and the sum diverges to infinity. By this calculation, a rational gambler should pay any finite price to play. Yet people will not. If someone offered you a ticket, you might hesitate at $10. Few would pay $100. No one would sell a house for 1 chance. The paradox lies in the gap between infinite expected value and the modest sums people will risk. The problem was posed in the early 18th century by Nicholas Bernoulli and later analyzed by his cousin Daniel Bernoulli. It mattered because it showed a flaw in the simple idea that people act to maximize expected monetary value. If that principle held, people would stake fortunes. They do not. Something else governs choice. Daniel Bernoulli's answer was diminishing marginal utility. He argued that people do not value each extra dollar equally. The first dollar has more weight than the 1,000th. To capture this, he proposed a logarithmic function for utility. Doubling wealth does not double satisfaction. Each extra unit adds less than the last. When you calculate expected utility rather than expected dollars, the sum converges to a finite number. Using Bernoulli's logarithm, the expected utility is small. This explains why a rational person would only pay a modest fee. You can test this with examples. Suppose you have $100. Gaining another 100 feels important. If you already had $1 million, that same 100 feels trivial. The rare huge payouts in the lottery look enormous in dollars, but minor in utility. What is infinite in money terms shrinks when filtered through human value. Another explanation is real limits. The paradox assumes infinite flips and infinite bankrolls. No casino can pay endless sums. No player has infinite time. Cap the game at 30 flips and the maximum payout is over $1 billion. But the chance of reaching 30 tails first is less than 1 in 1 billion. The expected value is still large, but finite. The paradox softens once you impose realistic bounds. Even with caps, intuition remains. A game with a calculated expected value in the thousands would still not tempt most people to pay more than a few dollars. Risk aversion matters. People prefer certainty. They often take a sure 20 over a 50-50 chance at 50. In this lottery, the most likely outcomes are tiny. Half the time, the payout is only 2. 3/4 of the time, it is 4 or less. The huge jackpots exist, but almost never occur. The distribution is heavily skewed, and people respond to what is probable, not to what is possible. This mismatch shows in practice. If you play once, odds are overwhelming that you leave with a trivial prize. The expectation is driven by a tale you will likely never see. The formula treats the rare jackpots the same as the common outcomes. Real players do not. They focus on what usually happens. This links to the law of large numbers. If you could play endlessly with unlimited funds, the rare jackpots would eventually appear and pull the average upward. Over infinite plays, the mean payout grows without bound. But no one can play forever. The theoretical expectation is not realized in practical play. Economists extended these ideas into expected utility theory. They formalized the idea that rational agents maximize expected utility, not money. Utility functions must be concave, meaning each added unit of wealth has less value. The St. Petersburg Paradox became a textbook case showing why such functions are necessary. Other thinkers suggested different fixes. Some argued people weight probabilities unevenly. A 1 in a million chance feels like 0. If so, the far tail of the lottery carries no weight in the mind, and the game seems modest. Others pointed to bounded rationality. Real people do not calculate infinite series in a casino. They make quick judgments based on likely payoffs, dismissing the tail. Bankroll and ruin also matter. To buy a ticket, you must pay up front. If the price is high and you win a small payout, you lose. A wealthy bank could absorb many losses and wait for the jackpot. An ordinary person cannot. The paradox highlights the gulf between abstract expectation and the constraints of real decision-making. Picture the game offered at $50 per ticket. Half the time, you walk away with $2. 3/4 of the time with 4 or less. Unless you are extremely rich or unusually risk-seeking, you decline. Drop the price to $2 and you might accept, because the worst case is break-even. Choices reflect the skewed distribution, not the infinite expectation. Variants appear elsewhere. Insurance is one. People pay to protect against rare losses. The expected loss in dollars may be small, but the utility loss of losing a house is vast, so insurance makes sense. Lotteries are another. Tickets have negative expected value in dollars, but the tiny chance of a life-changing jackpot has large perceived utility. The St. Petersburg Paradox sits in between. A lottery with positive, infinite expected value, but negligible appeal. This is why the paradox still interests philosophers and economists. It exposes the gap between abstraction and behavior. It shows that pure expectation in money is not enough to guide choice. Human decision rests on utility, probability perception, and risk tolerance. The infinite value of the lottery implies absurd behavior if taken literally. With real human factors, the modest willingness to pay makes sense. Period. Imagine the night sky as a vast field of stars. If that field had no edge, and if stars filled every direction, then your eyes would land on one no matter where you looked. Each far star would seem faint, but there would be so many that the total light would add up. In an eternal, unchanging cosmos, this sum would not stop. The whole sky would blaze like the surface of a star. Yet the sky is dark. This is Olbers Paradox. A simple picture makes the issue clear. Picture space as a set of shells around you. Each shell lies farther away than the last. Stars in a shell look dimmer with distance, since light spreads out, but each larger shell holds more stars. In a uniform universe, the extra stars in each shell cancel the dimming from distance. Every shell adds the same amount of light. With endless shells, the sum diverges. That is the paradox in one stroke. The clash does not come from tricky math. It comes from assumptions. The bright sky result needs a universe that is eternal, static, and filled with stars everywhere. It also assumes nothing blocks the view from each star to your eye. Compare these with what we know, and the dark sky makes sense. First, the universe has a finite age. Light has a finite speed. There is a horizon set by the product of age and speed, stretched by cosmic expansion. We can see only as far as light has had time to travel since the first stars formed. This alone breaks the infinite sum of shells. Beyond a certain distance, starlight has not arrived. The sum stops. Second, the universe expands. As space stretches, the wavelength of light stretches with it. This redshift lowers the energy of each photon and spreads their arrival times. The surface brightness of a distant source drops with the fourth power of 1 plus redshift, known as the Tolman test. In a static universe, brightness would not fade for a uniform sea of stars. In an expanding one, it fades fast. Distant galaxies add much less light than the shell model predicts. Third, stars have lifetimes. They are born, burn, and die. The rate of star birth peaked billions of years ago and has declined since. Most stars are small and faint. A few are bright but short-lived. The total light output per unit volume, the luminosity density, is finite. Integrated over cosmic history, the result is finite. The sky glows faintly, but not like a star. Some suggest dust as the answer. Dust does block starlight, but in an eternal universe, dust would not stay cold. Grains absorb energy, heat up, and glow. They would re-radiate the blocked light until the sky shone at the dust's temperature. Dust alone cannot solve the paradox. In our universe, dust does block and scatter visible light, but it re-radiates that energy in the infrared. We detect this as the cosmic infrared background. It moves energy out of visible light into longer wavelengths. This shifts light away from your eyes and helps explain the dark sky while leaving a faint glow elsewhere. The largest glow is the cosmic microwave background. It predates stars. It comes from when the universe first became transparent to radiation. Space has stretched those photons into the microwave band. They now bathe the sky at about 3 Kelvin. If you could see microwaves, the sky would shine everywhere. In visible light, your eyes sense almost none of it. The visible sky stays dark, even though the universe is filled with light. A simple analogy helps. Stand in a forest at night. Place candles 1 meter away, 2 meters, 3 meters, and so on without end. If all burn forever and the air stays clear, Each ring of candles adds the same glow. The grove would blaze like day. Now change the scene. Let candles light at different times, with many not yet burning. Let the air fill with smoke that absorbs light and vents heat away. Let the ground move the candles apart so their flames stretch and cool into red embers. Now the total glow is finite. You see nearby candles, but not a wall of flame. The real sky is like this second scene. Add another detail. The universe is not packed with stars at every point. Most of space is empty. Stars live in galaxies. Galaxies gather in clusters and filaments, with vast voids between. This patchy layout means lines of sight cross dark regions. This helps, but the deeper causes are age and expansion. Even in a uniform cosmos, the horizon and redshift would cap the sum. Geometry and energy also matter. Brightness depends on how much energy a source emits and how that energy spreads. In an expanding universe, each burst of light is diluted 3 ways. Space grows, so photons spread out. Each photon loses energy to redshift, and the rate of photon arrival slows compared to the source's clock. These effects stop the sky from blowing up in brightness. They turn the infinite sum into a converging sum. This links to a simple formula. Think of the light you see as the integral over time of light production per unit volume, scaled by dimming factors. Production rises and falls with star birth and death. Dimming scales with expansion through a factor like 1 over 1 plus z to the 4th. The past is bright because galaxies were closer and stars formed fast, but redshift cancels the buildup. The integral converges. Observations match this picture. Deep images from telescopes show a dark sky dotted with discrete sources. Adding up their light gives a finite optical background. Infrared surveys show more power from dust and old stars. Microwave maps show a bright glow from early times. Surface brightness fades with redshift in line with the Tolman test. The star formation rate peaks in the past and falls toward now. Each piece of data supports the same answer. A common pushback asks why dust cannot be the whole story. The flaw is that energy does not vanish. Absorbed light heats dust until it glows. The universe would then shine at the dust's temperature. Our universe avoids this because it changes with time. Redshift drains energy into colder background radiation. Dust radiates at low temperatures, moving energy away from visible light. Another pushback asks whether a finite visible sky means a finite universe. It does not. Space may be infinite. The observable part is finite because of time and expansion. You live inside a finite past light cone. You see a finite number of galaxies and receive a finite flux. The rest lies beyond the horizon, not because it does not exist, but because light has not had time to reach you, and what does arrive has been stretched thin. Local effects play a role too. Airglow and zodiacal light from dust in the solar system add a faint veil. City lights add more. On a dark night far from towns, you still do not see a bright dome. You see the Milky Way as a band cut by dust lanes. That near view mirrors the larger reasons. Light sources are discrete and not thick enough to blend into a sheet, and the paths between them are not old or clear enough to flood your view. Olbers' name is tied to the paradox, but the puzzle was noted earlier. Modern physics resolves it. Finite age sets a horizon. Expansion redshifts and dilutes light. Star lifetimes and a changing birth rate limit the output. Dust shifts energy into other bands but cannot erase it. The night sky is dark because the universe does not match the old static model. Much light has slipped out of visible range, and the rest has had only limited time to arrive. Temporal anchoring works by pulling a person back to a moment in time, real or imagined, and using it as leverage. The manipulator brings up a past statement or agreement and shifts the timeline, so the memory now serves their agenda. It is not always an outright lie, but a selective version of events that blurs what was said, when it was said, and in what context. The target, unsure of their own recollection, often defaults to conceding rather than risk looking forgetful or careless. In this way, temporal anchoring turns memory into a tool of control. Consider a simple workplace scenario. A manager tells an employee, "Remember last month when you agreed to handle extra tasks for this quarter?" The employee searches their memory. Maybe they offered to help for a week, not a quarter, but the way the manager frames it makes it seem settled. Correcting the record would require both confidence and proof, neither of which may be easily at hand. To avoid conflict, the employee nods and accepts the larger burden. The manipulation works not by force, but by bending time, attaching present obligation to a past that may not exist in the way described. In relationships, temporal anchoring is even more powerful. A partner might say, "You promised me years ago that you would always support my decisions." The statement may be true in spirit, but not in the rigid way it is being invoked now. By dragging a vague promise from the past into a present dispute, the manipulator changes the argument. Instead of debating the current decision, the conversation shifts to defending consistency with a past ideal. The person on the receiving end feels pressured to honor words spoken in a different context, perhaps long before the present situation was imaginable. Another example comes from negotiations. A seller might tell a buyer, "You told me last week this was already a fair price." The buyer may recall saying it seemed close, not final, but the seller reframes the timeline, turning a tentative statement into a binding commitment. To resist, the buyer must risk looking dishonest or fickle. Temporal anchoring works here by appealing to the natural human need to appear consistent. Few want to be seen as shifting positions, so they allow themselves to be trapped by a distorted version of the past. Family dynamics often rely on this technique. A parent may remind an adult child, "When you were younger, you said you would always take care of me." The child likely said something in the language of affection, not a binding contract. Yet invoked decades later, the phrase becomes a moral obligation. It becomes difficult to untangle the emotional weight of memory from the manipulative framing. The child might comply out of guilt, even if the practical reality makes the demand unreasonable. Temporal anchoring thrives in environments where memory is fluid. Meetings without minutes, conversations without witnesses, or relationships where trust outweighs record-keeping all provide fertile ground. The manipulator knows most people will not keep detailed notes of casual exchanges. They exploit this gap, crafting a timeline that cannot be easily challenged. Even when challenged, they can double down with certainty. "I remember it clearly," which puts the burden of proof on the other person. Few people want to fight over memory unless they have clear evidence, so most give way. Politics offers grand-scale examples. A leader might say, "This nation has always stood for these values," even if history tells a different story. By anchoring collective memory to a selective timeline, they shape what people believe about the past. Once accepted, this version of history influences present policy. Citizens act as though they are continuing tradition, when in fact, they may be stepping into something new framed as old. The manipulation is subtle because it feels like loyalty to memory, not submission to distortion. Temporal anchoring also intersects with gaslighting. In gaslighting, a person is made to doubt their memory outright. Temporal anchoring takes a softer approach. Instead of denying memory, it reshapes it. The target may remember something, but the manipulator reframes when it happened, how long it lasted, or what it meant. Over time, the target begins to rely on the manipulator's version of events rather than their own. This reliance deepens control because the manipulator becomes the authority on both past and present. Consider the case of a project team. During planning, someone floated an idea, but no decision was made. Weeks later, the project lead says, "We agreed back then to go with this direction." The others hesitate. They recall discussion, but not consensus. Yet with deadlines pressing, no one wants to drag out old debates. The manipulated timeline wins by default. The project proceeds as if a decision was made, even though it was not. In personal disputes, temporal anchoring can silence pushback. Imagine two friends arguing. One says, "You've always supported me when I was in trouble." It is hard to argue with always. The other friend may think of exceptions, but the sweeping claim reframes the present as a test of loyalty. The past is reshaped into a continuous story of support, and any hesitation now looks like betrayal. Temporal anchoring turns selective memory into moral pressure. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in human memory itself. Memory is not a perfect recording. It is reconstructed each time we recall it. That reconstruction is vulnerable to suggestion, especially when delivered with confidence. If someone asserts, "This happened on Tuesday, remember?" the brain often adjusts its recollection to fit. The manipulator counts on this flexibility. They present a timeline that feels familiar enough to pass, even if it is false. The target's uncertainty fills in the rest. Technology does not always solve the problem. Emails, texts, and notes can document timelines, but manipulators adapt. They may reference verbal conversations that were never written down. They may interpret vague words, soon, later, next time, in rigid ways once time has passed. By stretching flexible language into fixed anchors, they control outcomes. Even in digital records, ambiguity can be bent to serve. An example in hiring shows the point. A candidate asks for time to think. The recruiter later says, "You told me last call you were ready to decide today." The candidate recalls asking for space, not committing to a deadline. Yet the recruiter insists. The pressure mounts. Without evidence, the candidate may fold. Temporal anchoring here transforms hesitation into obligation. Social groups apply it too. Someone in a club says, "At the last meeting, we all agreed to this plan." In truth, the group may have only discussed it, but unless someone kept minutes, the false anchor becomes accepted. Collective memory can be as pliable as individual memory, and once repeated, the distorted timeline becomes the official version. The tactic succeeds because it preys on the natural discomfort of contradiction. Few people enjoy disputes over who remembers correctly. Most would rather move forward than dig into details. Manipulators exploit this preference for harmony, knowing their version will stand if left unchallenged. Temporal anchoring, at its core, is the strategic bending of memory's timeline. It does not erase the past, but repaints it. The repainted version links old words to new demands, leaving the target caught between defending memory and preserving peace. The manipulator wins either way, because the frame of time itself has been shifted to their favor. Imagine two treatments for an illness. In each age group, treatment A works better than treatment B. But when we add the data from both groups together, treatment B looks better. This reversal is Simpson's paradox. It happens when the trend in every subgroup flips once the groups are combined. It feels wrong at first glance, but the logic is sound. The paradox teaches how grouping and weighting change results in statistics. Start with a small example. Suppose we divide patients by age, young and old. Among young patients, treatment A cures 90 out of 100, while treatment B cures 80 out of 100. Among old patients, treatment A cures 10 out of 100, while treatment B cures 5 out of 100. Within both groups, A beats B. But now look at the combined totals. Suppose most young patients took B and most old patients took A. Then A's total cures are 100 out of 200, while B's are 160 out of 200. In the combined data, B looks better, even though A won in both subgroups. The shift comes from the uneven mix of patients. The group with lower success rates had more patients under A. This weighted the overall average down. This reversal feels strange because people expect consistency. If A beats B in each part, they expect A to beat B in the whole. Simpson's paradox shows that expectation fails when the parts differ in size or in baseline success. The paradox is not a trick in the math, but a lesson about how data can hide its story. The same idea appears in sports. Imagine two baseball players. Player X has a higher batting average than player Y in the first half of the season. X also has a higher average in the second half. But if Y has far more at-bats in the half where both averages are high, Y's total average can be greater. Again, the subgroup trend reverses in the combined data. Another scenario involves hiring. A company considers two departments. In each department, the hiring rate for women is higher than the hiring rate for men. Yet when the numbers are added, the overall hiring rate for women is lower. The paradox emerges because most female applicants applied to the department with a low overall acceptance rate, while most male applicants applied to the department with a high rate. When combined, the group with more women pulls down the overall number. The reversal can create the false impression of bias in the opposite direction. The structure behind all these cases is the same. Each subgroup has its own rates. When combined, the overall rate becomes a weighted average. The weights depend on how many cases fall in each subgroup. If the group sizes differ enough, the overall result can flip. The paradox teaches that no single summary can capture the full story. You must ask how the data is divided and where the weight lies. Mathematically, the paradox comes from confounding variables. In the treatment example, age is the confounder. Age influences both the treatment distribution and the outcome. When we ignore age and pool the data, we let the confounder distort the result. The paradox does not mean the subgroup findings are wrong. It shows that context matters for interpretation. One way to think about it is to imagine two axes. Along one axis, compare treatments. Along the other, compare age groups. The slope between treatments may be positive in each age group, but if the groups lie at very different baselines, the slope of the line that connects the group averages can be negative. The geometry explains the flip. We can also think in terms of weighted averages. Suppose the success rate for treatment A is 90% for young and 10% for old. Treatment B has 80% for young and 5% for old. If 90% of A's patients are old, while 90% of B's patients are young, the weights pull the totals. A's weighted average drops below B's, even though A was higher in each group. The paradox depends on how the weights align with the subgroup results. Real-world cases are common. In 1973, the University of California, Berkeley faced a lawsuit claiming gender bias in graduate admissions. The overall data showed a lower acceptance rate for women. But when admissions were broken down by department, most departments admitted women at a higher rate. The apparent bias came from the fact that women applied more often to departments with lower acceptance rates. Men applied more to departments with higher acceptance rates. The paradox was a key element in the case. Another example appears in medicine. Two treatments may show different survival rates. If one treatment is used more often in severe cases and the other in mild cases, the totals may suggest the worst treatment is better. Only by splitting the data by severity do we see the true pattern. Without careful subgroup analysis, a doctor might choose the wrong treatment. Sports also offer dramatic illustrations. In basketball, a player might have a higher shooting percentage than another in both the first and second half of a season. Yet the totals may favor the other player. This happens if the first player takes many more shots during the cold half of the season, while the second takes more during the hot half. The weights shift the averages. The paradox also connects to causality. If we want to know which treatment truly works better, we need to control for confounders. Statistical tools like stratification, regression, and causal graphs help separate real effects from artifacts of aggregation. Simpson's paradox shows why raw totals can mislead. It is not enough to compare outcomes. We must understand what drives the distribution of cases. The paradox does not always appear. It requires a particular alignment, subgroup differences in both outcome and distribution. If all groups have the same baseline rate, the totals will match the subgroup trend. If the distributions are balanced, the totals will not flip. The paradox occurs only when both forces, different baselines and skewed weights, work together. One way to spot risk is to ask, does a third variable affect both the independent and dependent variables? If yes, then pooling across that variable may create distortion. In the treatment case, age affects both treatment choice and recovery. In hiring, department affects both applicant distribution and acceptance rates. When these links exist, the chance of reversal is real. The paradox also highlights how decisions based on incomplete data can be dangerous. Imagine a public health board that only looks at total survival numbers. They might approve the treatment that seems better overall, but is worse in every group. A deeper look avoids this mistake. To illustrate further, consider a classroom. Two teachers grade tests. Teacher A gives higher marks than Teacher B in both math and reading. Yet when the results are combined, Teacher B's average looks higher. This happens if most students with weak skills take classes with Teacher A, while strong students take classes with Teacher B. The subgroup advantage for A is drowned by the skew in student placement. Simpson's paradox is not a flaw in arithmetic. It is a reminder that averages reflect structure. Data is shaped by how groups divide and by how cases distribute across them. When we merge groups, we merge their weights. If we do not account for this, we can misread reality. The paradox also teaches humility. Numbers can mislead if we do not ask how they were formed. A simple total may hide confounders. Only by breaking down data do we see the full story. Every reversal in Simpson's paradox is a lesson that context defines truth in statistics. Zeno's paradoxes ask what motion means. The best known are Achilles and the tortoise and the arrow in flight. Both use simple steps to raise a hard question. If a path or time can be split into endlessly smaller parts, how does motion ever finish? These puzzles feel fresh because they probe how we think about space, time, and change. Start with Achilles and the tortoise. The tortoise has a head start of 100 meters. Achilles runs at 10 meters per second. The tortoise moves at 5 meters per second. Achilles runs faster and should catch up. Zeno asks us to track the chase in stages. First, Achilles reaches the place where the tortoise began. That takes 10 seconds. In that time, the tortoise has moved 50 meters. Next, Achilles covers that 50 meters in 5 seconds. The tortoise crawls another 25 meters. Then Achilles runs those 25 meters in 2.5 seconds, while the tortoise gains 12.5. Each time Achilles arrives where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved on. The list of stages is endless: 100, 50, 25, 12.5, and so on. If all stages must be crossed, how can Achilles ever finish? Catching the tortoise seems to require infinitely many moves, so it looks like he never pulls even. Now check the numbers rather than the steps. The stage times form a geometric series, 10 plus 5 plus 2.5 plus 1.25 and ... Each term is half the previous. The series sums to 20 seconds. That matches the simple rule. Catch time equals head start divided by speed gap, which is 100 divided by 10 minus 5 equals 20. The distance series also converges. 100 plus 50 plus 25 plus 12.5 and ... 200 meters. The 200-meter mark, both stand together. The infinite stages are one way to carve up a single motion, not extra tasks that add time. You can slice an interval into as many pieces as you like. The total stays the same. The key tool is the limit. When pieces shrink by a fixed ratio, their sum approaches a finite number. Achilles passes every marked point, but the shrinking times add to a finite total. The thought that infinite means never ends sneaks in because we picture a chore list that grows forever. But chores and limits are not the same. Suppose you cool tea by half the gap to room temperature each minute. After 1 minute, the gap is half. After 2 minutes, it is a quarter. After 3, it is an eighth. You never cut the gap to 0 if you treat each halving as a separate act. But the temperature reaches the room value in the limit. Achilles does not run as a series of rituals. He runs once along a path. The infinite partition lies in our description, not in his legs. Zeno's second story is the arrow. At any one instant, the arrow has one exact position. In that frozen slice, there is no change. If every instant is like that, and time is a stack of instants, then the arrow seems at rest at every instant, so it never moves. The force of the puzzle comes from the idea that motion must be found inside each instant. Yet an instant has no span in which to move. The modern answer uses the derivative. Instant velocity is not motion packed into a single instant. It is the limit of average velocities over shorter intervals around that instant. Take 2 times, t and t plus h. Compute the average speed. Then let h shrink to 0. If the position function is smooth, that limit exists. The value is velocity at time t. You do not need the arrow to move during an instant. You need its position to vary when you compare instants. Motion lives in the relation between times, not in what happens within a point. Think of a video. A single frame shows no motion. Run many frames and motion appears. The effect is not hidden inside a frame. It is the relation across frames. Calculus makes that relation exact. The derivative dx over dt measures how x changes with t as the change grows small. That value can be non-zero even though each instant has 0 duration. Motion belongs to intervals, not to single instants. The Allais Paradox swaps those levels. Both paradoxes press on space and time as continuous. Zeno forces us to ask whether a line can contain endlessly many points and still have finite length, and whether time can contain endlessly many instants and still have finite duration. In mathematics, the answer is yes. A geometric series can converge. A function can have a derivative. With those tools, infinite partition does not block motion. Yet Zeno's push does not fade. It reminds us to state assumptions. We assume space and time are continua. We assume positions and times can be measured by real numbers. We assume bodies trace continuous paths, at least in classical physics. If deeper theory says space and time come in discrete units, details would change. But the core point remains. The count of parts does not settle motion. What matters is how parts add up. It helps to set the 2 stories side by side. Achilles shows that summing endless smaller gaps can yield a finite total. The arrow shows that motion depends on how positions vary near an instant. not on squeezing movement into one instant. Together, they clear two traps, mistaking an infinite list for an endless task and mistaking a snapshot for the whole of change. Try another Achilles run. Suppose the tortoise has a 200-meter lead. Achilles runs at 12 meters per second. The tortoise runs at 3 meters per second. The speed gap is 9 meters per second. The catch time is 200 divided by 9 equals 22.2 seconds. The stage times form 16.7, 4.2, 1.0, 0.24, and so on. Their sum tends toward 22.2 seconds. The stage distances form 200, 50, 12.5, 3.125, and so on, tending to 266.6 meters. There is no puzzle in the total. The series converges because the ratio is less than 1. If you plot partial sums, they approach the catch value. The list has no last term, but the sum has a limit. Achilles reaches the tortoise within half a minute. The arrow allows a formula check. Take x of t equals vt, the position at constant speed v. At any time, dx over dt equals v. At each instant, the arrow has a fixed position, yet the slope of the position function is non-zero. That slope is velocity. Or take x of t equals ha squared, position under constant acceleration a. Then, velocity is at. At t equals 1, speed is a. At t equals 0, speed is 0, but it grows after. The arrow is not frozen because we look at a slice. Motion is the pattern across slices. The derivative captures it. Zeno's style also hints at supertasks, jobs needing infinitely many things. Turning a knob by half the remaining turn, then half again, looks unending. Yet the knob reaches the stop because the total turn has a finite limit. Again, the partition lies in our head. The physical act is one motion with a finite time. You can insert markers at halves, quarters, eighths. Passing them does not add time. For a check, watch a sprinter chase a slower runner. Coaches mark splits every 10 meters. The chaser crosses each mark quicker because the speed gap erases the lead at a steady rate. The list of marks can be long, but the pass still happens in short time. Marks do not slow legs. Some ask whether infinite points confuses math with physics. A line has unending points, but matter may not follow that structure at small scales. Yet motion in the lab matches calculus. Projectiles trace smooth curves. Clocks match sums and limits. Engineering rests on that match. For scales we use to run and build, the continuum model works. Zeno's paradoxes have force because they strip motion to its bones and twist how we describe it. They expose where careless language makes infinite sound like impossible, and where snapshots hide change. The tools that answer them, limits, convergent series, instantaneous velocity, are core parts of calculus. The questions still guide us. They keep us alert to the gap between how we define the world and how the world carries on. Picture a choice between two lotteries. In the first, you can take a guaranteed $1 million. In the second, you can take a gamble, an 89% chance of $1 million, a 10% chance of $5 million, and a 1% chance of nothing. Many people take the sure million. They prefer certainty over a gamble with higher possible gain. Now imagine a second choice. Here, the first lottery offers an 11% chance of $1 million and an 89% chance of nothing. The second offers a 10% chance of $5 million and a 90% chance of nothing. In this case, many switch to the gamble with the higher prize, even though its structure mirrors the earlier decision. Both choices cannot fit with expected utility theory. This clash is the Allais Paradox. Expected utility theory is central in economics. It assumes people weigh outcomes by their probability and utility, then choose the option with the highest expected value. Utility reflects the subjective value a person assigns to money, health, or other outcomes. The theory requires consistency. If you prefer one option over another in one context, you should make the same choice in similar contexts. Allais showed that real human choices often break this rule. The paradox hinges on how people treat certainty. In the first pair, many feel that a sure million outweighs a gamble that leaves even a 1% chance of nothing. In the second pair, certainty is gone. Both options carry risk, so people focus on upside potential. A 10% chance of 5 million looks better than an 11% chance of 1 million. They ignore that the logic of their choices conflicts with the earlier decision. This preference shift breaks the independence axiom of expected utility theory. The axiom says that if you prefer A to B, you should also prefer a mixture of A with a third option to the same mixture of B with that option. In the Allais setup, the lottery pairs differ only by a common element, yet people reverse their choices. Their decisions do not follow expected utility. The same pattern appears outside money. Imagine a hospital trial. One treatment guarantees survival. Another offers an 89% chance of survival, a 10% chance of longer life, and a 1% chance of death. Most pick the guarantee. But if both treatments involve risk, people often choose the gamble with the higher top outcome. Certainty shapes behavior. This is the certainty effect. People treat a guaranteed outcome as far more valuable than one that is near certain. The small difference between 100% and 99% looms larger than the difference between 50% and 49%. Certainty feels distinct, not just another point on a scale. Expected utility, which treats probabilities as smooth weights, cannot capture that. The paradox also highlights shifting risk attitudes. People are risk-averse when gains are certain. They lock in the sure prize. But when all options involve risk of nothing, they become risk-seeking. Attitudes toward risk shift with context. A business case shows the same. A firm can accept a contract that guarantees 1 million in profit, or it can pursue a deal with a high chance of 1 million, a smaller chance of 5 million, and a small chance of nothing. Most managers would take the guaranteed contract. But if the choice changes to a modest chance of 1 million versus a modest chance of 5 million, many switch to the riskier deal. The reversal mirrors the paradox. Psychologists view the paradox as proof that people do not compute expected utilities. Instead, they use heuristics. They overweight certainty and also overweight low-probability extreme outcomes. These tendencies create patterns that defy expected utility but fit human psychology. Prospect theory, developed by Kahneman and Tversky, built on these findings. It replaces expected utility with a model where people evaluate outcomes relative to a reference point and distort probabilities. Certainty gets extra weight, and very small probabilities are overemphasized. This explains why people both buy insurance and lottery tickets. Insurance protects against small chances of disaster, which people overweight. Lotteries exploit the appeal of tiny chances of huge gain. The Allais Paradox was one of the puzzles prospect theory sought to explain. Regret also plays a role. People imagine how they will feel after the outcome. In the first pair, someone who gave up the sure million and ended with nothing would feel deep regret. Avoiding that regret drives them toward the certain prize. In the second pair, where both carry high chances of nothing, regret matters less. People focus on the possibility of great success and choose the gamble. The paradox has wide implications. If people violate expected utility, then models that assume rational choice may mispredict behavior in markets, insurance, or policy. If citizens overweight certainty, guaranteed benefits will appeal more than probabilistic gains. If they overweight small probabilities, rare risks may dominate decisions. These tendencies influence public health choices, investment, and consumer behavior. Consider shoppers. One store offers a guaranteed $20 coupon. Another offers 89% chance of $20, 10% chance of $100, and 1% chance of nothing. Shoppers often take the sure 20. But if the coupons instead offer small chances, say 11% chance of $20 versus 10% chance of $100, many switch to the gamble. Their logic breaks expected utility, but fits human psychology. Policy examples follow the same line. A program that guarantees all households a modest subsidy may gain more support than one that offers a chance at larger payouts tied to uncertain factors, even if the expected value is higher. Citizens prefer the guarantee. Yet in disaster relief, where nothing is certain, people may support riskier plans that offer hope of large gains. Insurance markets also show the paradox. A family may prefer a policy that guarantees full coverage, even if a cheaper policy covers almost as much at far lower cost. The 1% gap between full and nearly full coverage looms large. Yet the same family might also spend on a lottery with a minuscule chance of a huge prize. Both behaviors reflect overweighting of certainty and extremes, the forces behind the paradox. The Allais Paradox does not show people as irrational in a careless sense. It shows that human preferences follow a pattern different from the one economists assumed. Certainty has special pull. Small chances of extremes capture imagination, and context shifts risk attitudes. These are not random mistakes, but systematic behaviors. They can be measured, predicted, and built into better models. When Maurice Allais first presented the paradox, many economists resisted. Expected utility theory was elegant and powerful. To admit violations felt like weakening its core. But repeated experiments confirmed the paradox. People's choices consistently followed the same pattern. This opened the way to new theories that match behavior more closely. The paradox remains a guide in behavioral economics. It shows that numbers alone do not capture how people feel about risk. Smooth scales of probability and utility bend under perception. Certainty weighs heavier than 100% in the mind. And small chances of extremes weigh more than math allows. To understand decisions, we must see how people frame choices, fear regret, and hope for gain. The sentence says, "This statement is false." If it is true, then what it says must hold, and it must be false. If it is false, then what it says does not hold, so it must be true. Either way, truth flips into falsehood, and falsehood flips into truth. This is the liar paradox. It looks simple, almost like a word game, yet it has shaped philosophy, mathematics, and logic for centuries. The paradox works because the sentence refers to itself. Ordinary sentences point outward. The sky is blue refers to the sky. 2 + 2 is 4 refers to numbers. The liar sentence refers to itself. That self-reference turns it into a loop. Its truth depends on its own falsehood, and its falsehood depends on its own truth. No stable truth value fits. We can test it step by step. Suppose the liar sentence is true, then what it states, that it is false, must hold. but that makes it false. Now suppose it is false. Then what it states does not hold, which means it is true. In each branch, the value flips. No fixed point exists. The paradox is not a matter of hidden meaning or missing context. It is built into the structure of the words. Variations show the same pattern. Take "this statement is not true." If it is true, then it is not true. If it is not true, then it is true. Or "I am lying." If the speaker is telling the truth, then they are lying, so not telling the truth. If they are lying, then the statement is true, so they are telling the truth. In each case, self-reference produces a cycle. To see why this matters, consider logic as a system. In logic, statements are either true or false. That two-valued structure is the base of mathematics, proof, and reasoning. The liar shows that not every statement fits cleanly into that structure. Some statements, by their form, collapse the system. This challenges the idea that truth and falsehood are enough to classify all sentences. One way to resolve the paradox is to say the liar sentence is meaningless. Perhaps it fails to describe a state of the world, so it should not count as true or false. This is a semantic fix. It declares self-reference invalid. But people object that the liar sentence is clear enough in form and meaning. It uses plain words that seem to follow grammar. Calling it meaningless feels like dodging the problem. Another approach uses many-valued logic. Instead of only true and false, some systems allow a third value, like undefined or indeterminate. In such a system, the liar is neither true nor false, but undefined. This avoids the flip. The cost is that we must expand the logic system. Classical logic resists this, since it prefers only two values. Still, many-valued systems have gained use, especially in computer science, where undefined or null values occur often. There is also paraconsistent logic, which allows contradictions without collapse. In such systems, a sentence can be both true and false. The liar then holds both values at once. This keeps the contradiction contained without letting it ruin the rest of the system. Paraconsistent logics are useful in fields where data can conflict yet still needs processing. The liar paradox also appears in mathematics. Gödel's incompleteness theorems use a form of self-reference. Gödel built statements in arithmetic that say this statement is not provable. If the system proves the statement, it contradicts itself. If it cannot prove the statement, then the statement is true but unprovable. This mirrors the liar. It shows that self-reference, when strong enough, limits what formal systems can do. Another version is the strengthened liar. It says, this statement is not true. If we try to classify it as false, then it becomes true. Since falsehood means not true, if we classify it as true, then it is not true. This form resists the idea that the liar is merely meaningless. The strengthened version does not let go so easily. It sharpens the paradox. We can also build chains. Suppose we have two sentences. The first says, the next statement is true. The second says, the previous statement is false. The pair as a whole creates the same cycle as the single liar. The truth of one depends on the other, and together they loop. This shows the paradox is not only about a single self-reference, but also about circular reference in general. Examples in everyday language show the same tension. A sign on a door reads, "Ignore this sign." If you obey the sign, you must ignore it, which means you do not obey it. If you ignore it, you disobey, which means you obey. The cycle repeats. Or imagine a card with the sentence on the other side of this card is true, printed on one side, and the sentence on the other side of this card is false on the other. Flip it back and forth, and the paradox stays alive. The liar paradox has also shaped theories of truth. Alfred Tarski, a logician, proposed a hierarchy. He argued that no language can contain its own truth predicate without contradiction. To say, "this sentence is false," requires a truth predicate inside the language. Tarski's fix was to separate levels. A base language cannot talk about the truth of its own sentences. A higher-level language can. This prevents the loop. The cost is that languages cannot express their own truth. Kripke proposed another route. He used partial truth definitions and fixed points. In his model, some sentences have no truth value. The liar is one of them. Instead of forcing every sentence to be true or false, his system allows some to remain undefined. This approach preserves most of classical logic while avoiding paradox. The paradox also reaches into philosophy. It questions what we mean by truth. If truth is correspondence to reality, then what reality does the liar correspond to? None, since it only speaks of itself. If truth is coherence with other statements, the liar breaks coherence. It does not fit with any consistent set. The paradox pushes us to refine the very idea of truth. In computer science, self-reference is common. Programs can print their own code or refer to their own states. If a program checks whether it halts, and if it halts only when it does not halt, we face a version of the liar. This is the halting problem, which Alan Turing showed is undecidable. It shares the same root. A system cannot fully capture its own behavior without risk of paradox. Even humor uses the liar. Think of a person saying, "I always lie." If the sentence is true, then it must be false. If false, then it may be true. The playfulness hides the depth. We laugh because we catch the cycle. The same cycle troubles deep systems of logic. The liar paradox has been known since ancient Greece. Eubulides of Miletus, a philosopher, posed it as a puzzle. Since then, it has appeared in theology, philosophy, mathematics, and modern logic. Each field wrestles with it in its own terms, but the core loop never vanishes. A sentence that denies its own truth forces us to face the limits of language and reasoning. The Fermi Paradox begins with a simple question. If the universe is vast, old, and full of stars, and if many of those stars have planets, then life should not be rare. Civilizations should have had billions of years to emerge, spread, and make themselves known. Yet when we look up at the sky, we find silence. No signals, no probes, no visits, no unmistakable signs. Enrico Fermi captured this in a casual remark over lunch in 1950. Where is everybody? That simple question forces us to examine our assumptions about life, technology, and the universe itself. To see why the paradox carries weight, imagine the scale. The Milky Way alone holds over 100 billion stars. Modern surveys suggest that most stars have planets, and many have rocky planets in the habitable zone, where liquid water could exist. Even if life is rare, the number of possible homes is so large that one expects many attempts at life. If even a fraction of those attempts succeed, there should be thousands or millions of civilizations scattered across our galaxy. Some would be ahead of us by millions of years. With such a head start, they could travel, build, or signal on scales we would notice. The fact that we see nothing is the puzzle. One way to approach the paradox is to run the numbers. The Drake equation, introduced in 1961, breaks the problem into factors: star formation rate, fraction with planets, number of habitable planets, probability of life starting, probability of intelligence, probability of technology, and lifetime of such civilizations. The first few factors we now know fairly well. Stars and planets are common. The biggest uncertainties sit in the middle. How often does life arise, and how often does it reach intelligence and technology? Even if those probabilities are low, multiplying them by billions of planets still yields large expectations. Yet the search for signals has returned silence. Consider the expansion scenario. If a civilization achieves interstellar travel, even at modest speeds, it could spread through the galaxy in a fraction of cosmic time. A colony ship moving at 10% the speed of light could cross the galaxy in 1,000,000 years, which is tiny compared to the age of the Milky Way. Even if ships spread slowly, the timescales suggest that a technological species could fill the galaxy many times over, yet we do not see clear signs of such expansion. The absence is striking, given the ease of imagining vast engineering projects, giant energy collectors around stars, networks of beacons, or structures altering planets that should stand out. One family of answers says life is rare. Perhaps the origin of life itself is an improbable event. On Earth, life arose early, within a few 100 million years after conditions stabilized, which suggests ease. But that might be misleading. It is possible that the sample size of one cannot show true difficulty. The chemical steps may be delicate, requiring very rare conditions. If so, Earth could be an outlier, and the galaxy may be mostly barren. Another step might be rare: complex cells, multicellularity, intelligence, or technology. Each stage could be a filter that most biospheres never pass. In that case, silence reflects scarcity, not mystery. Another answer shifts the burden to survival. Civilizations may emerge, but rarely last. Self-destruction is one possibility. Nuclear war, climate collapse, or engineered pathogens could wipe out species before they spread far. Or they may collapse for social or resource reasons. The timescale of survival might be measured in centuries or millennia, a blink compared to galactic time. If long-lived civilizations are rare, then at any given moment, few exist, and the odds of overlap shrink. The silence would then reflect fragility. Yet another possibility is choice. Civilizations may exist, but choose not to expand or to remain silent. Cultural or ethical reasons could lead them to avoid interference. This is sometimes called the zoo hypothesis, in which advanced beings watch us without revealing themselves, as if studying animals in a reserve. Or they might communicate only in ways we do not recognize, using narrow channels, quantum methods, or other techniques beyond our detection. What we perceive as silence might be chatter we cannot interpret. It is also possible that we have not searched enough. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, has scanned only small fractions of the sky, narrow frequency ranges, and brief time windows. Imagine trying to judge the existence of marine life by dipping a glass into the ocean once. Our search might be just as thin compared to the scale of the galaxy. Advanced civilizations may use frequencies or methods outside our current range. Laser pulses, neutrino signals, or megastructures might be there, but we lack the sensitivity or focus to find them. The paradox might shrink as our tools grow. Some speculate that civilizations could advance into forms we do not recognize. Instead of building vast visible structures, they may move toward efficiency, compact computing, or digital existence. Their footprints could be subtle: waste heat signatures, altered star spectra, or gravitational anomalies. Detecting such traces requires methods we are only beginning to explore. If advanced life optimizes rather than expands, the galaxy might be full but quiet. Another direction questions our assumptions about space and time. The speed of light sets a hard barrier. Even if civilizations exist, the signals may take thousands of years to reach us, and our own transmissions may not have reached them yet. Communication could be out of sync. They may also lie outside our detection horizon, too far or faint to notice. The vastness of space itself could make encounters rare, even if civilizations are common. In that sense, silence may not mean absence, but distance. There is also the unsettling thought that the silence is evidence of a great filter. This idea suggests that at least one step from star to civilization is so unlikely that almost no one passes it. The filter could be behind us, in the origin of life or intelligence, which would make us rare survivors. Or it could lie ahead, in self-destruction or limits to expansion, which would make our future precarious. The paradox then becomes not just a cosmic question, but a mirror for our own fate. To test these ideas, scientists look for biosignatures on exoplanets, gases like oxygen, methane, or combinations that hint at life. They also search for technosignatures, such as unusual radio signals, artificial light, or waste heat. As telescopes improve, we may soon have data on thousands of Earth-like worlds. Finding even one with clear life signs would shift the debate. Finding many would make the silence of intelligence sharper. So far, the evidence is thin but growing. The paradox also enters culture and philosophy. It challenges assumptions of progress and destiny. Science fiction often imagines crowded galaxies, yet our instruments show emptiness. This tension fuels stories of hidden watchers, ancient ruins, or failed empires. Philosophers use the paradox to probe human hubris, asking whether our expectations of abundance reflect more about us than about reality. The puzzle remains open because it sits at the edge of knowledge, touching astronomy, biology, technology, and psychology all at once. Consider again Fermi's lunch remark. He did not lay out an equation or proof, just a question. Where is everybody? That question is powerful because it strips down assumptions. If life is common and spread is easy, we should see signs. We do not. Something in our chain of reasoning must break. The paradox lives in that gap. Each possible answer changes how we see ourselves, as rare accidents, as fragile beginners, as members of a quiet community, or as future casualties of a filter. The search continues not only in telescopes, but in our minds, where the silence of the sky forces reflection. The Sleeping Beauty problem is a puzzle about probability that looks simple, but creates a sharp divide. The setup is this. On Sunday, Beauty learns she will be put to sleep and a fair coin will be tossed. If it lands heads, she will be woken on Monday once. If it lands tails, she will be woken on Monday and again on Tuesday, with her memory erased after the first waking. Each time she wakes, she does not know which day it is or how the coin landed. When she wakes, she is asked, "What is your belief that the coin landed heads?" One answer is 1/2. The coin is fair, and waking does not change that fact. She knew she would wake up at least once no matter what, so her being awake gives no new evidence. This is the halfer position. Halfers treat the coin toss as the basic reference point, and they say that nothing about the waking shifts the original 1/2 probability. The other answer is 1/3. If we count awakenings rather than coin tosses, there are twice as many when the coin lands tails. Across many trials, there would be 1 heads awakening for every 2 tails awakenings. So upon waking, the chance of being in a heads world is 1/3. This is the thirder position. Thirders treat the fact of being awake as evidence, and they say beauty should reason over awakenings rather than over tosses. The difference comes down to what counts as evidence. For halfers, the fairness of the coin is what matters, and waking is expected under either result. For thirders, the number of awakenings depends on the toss, so waking shifts the balance toward tails. The puzzle is whether to sample over coin tosses or over awakenings. You can see the contrast in a thought experiment. Suppose the experiment ran 1,000 times. About 500 times it would be heads, giving 500 awakenings. About 500 times it would be tails, giving 1,000 awakenings. Out of all 1,500 awakenings, only 1/3 are heads. That is the thirder reasoning. But if you look at the coin tosses alone, half are heads. That is the halfer reasoning. Analogies make the split easier to see. Imagine a lottery with red and blue tickets. Blue wins give 1 prize. Red wins give 2. If you learn you hold a winning ticket, but not the color, it is more likely red because more prizes are tied to red. That matches the thirder side. But if you are asked before the draw, the fair split of blue and red makes it 50-50. That matches the halfer side. The halfer view argues that the thirder mixes up location and evidence. Being awake is guaranteed, so it should not shift beliefs. The thirder view replies that location matters. Beauty does not know which awakening she is in, and the coin controls how many awakenings exist. That is why being awake carries information. Some philosophers try to bridge the gap by saying the right answer depends on how the question is phrased. If the question is about the coin toss itself, the answer is 1/2. If it is about the chance she is in a heads awakening, the answer is 1/3. The puzzle also links to wider debates about probability. It raises the problem of self-locating beliefs, where you know facts about the world, but not about your place in it. It tests the limits of Bayesian reasoning in cases where memory is erased. Some even connect it to cosmology, where observers must reason about their place in a vast or infinite universe with many possible copies of themselves. To stretch the setup, imagine that if the coin lands tails, beauty is woken 1,000 times. On thirder logic, the chance of heads upon waking becomes 1 in 1,001. On halfer logic, it stays 1/2. The stark contrast shows why interpretation matters. Which answer feels more natural depends on which perspective you adopt. When you place yourself in beauty's situation, both answers pull at you. You wake and realize you could be in one of several awakenings. Since tails makes more of them, 1/3 feels right. But you also remember the coin was fair, and nothing you now know changes that. 1/2 feels right too. This tension is what keeps the puzzle alive. In the late 19th century, physicists believed they had nearly solved the great puzzles of nature. Mechanics explained motion, Newton's laws described gravity, and Maxwell's equations unified electricity, magnetism, and light. Many thought the rest was just filling in details. But when they tried to apply classical physics to the behavior of heat and light, they ran into a problem so severe it threatened to break the entire framework. This became known as the Ultraviolet Catastrophe. It exposed a major failure in classical theory and opened the door to quantum physics. The problem begins with blackbody radiation. Imagine a simple object, like a metal box with a small hole in it. Light and heat bounce around inside, and some escapes through the hole. The light that comes out is called blackbody radiation. This radiation depends only on the temperature of the box, not on the material it is made of. That made it a perfect test case for theory, because if scientists could explain blackbody radiation, they could explain how energy moves in matter at a fundamental level. Using classical physics, scientists applied the laws of electromagnetism and thermodynamics to calculate how energy should spread among the waves inside the box. The waves can take on many frequencies, from long radio waves to very short ultraviolet and beyond. According to classical reasoning, each frequency should carry the same average energy. This idea is called the equipartition principle. If every frequency gets its share, then the total energy is just the sum over all possible frequencies. Here is where the catastrophe appears. There are infinitely many possible frequencies, especially at the short wavelength, high-frequency end of the spectrum. Add them all up, and the total energy becomes infinite. That would mean a hot object should emit endless amounts of energy in the ultraviolet range. Of course, that is not what experiments showed. A stove does not bathe the kitchen in blinding ultraviolet light. Instead, blackbody radiation peaks at a certain wavelength that shifts with temperature, and it drops off at both the long and short ends. classical physics could not account for this. The name ultraviolet catastrophe captures the absurd result. If you trust classical physics, a heated box should pour out infinite radiation in the ultraviolet. But when scientists measured blackbody radiation in the lab, the curve always had a clear maximum. For example, at room temperature, the peak sits in the infrared range, which is why we cannot see it with our eyes. As the temperature rises, the peak shifts into the visible, making objects glow red, then orange, then white. Beyond that, the curve falls off sharply, with no infinite spike. The theory and the data were in open conflict. Lord Rayleigh and James Jeans tried to fix the theory using known physics. They derived what is now called the Rayleigh-Jeans law. It matched experiments at long wavelengths, like radio and microwave. But as the wavelength got shorter, the formula predicted higher and higher energy, again racing toward infinity in the ultraviolet. This made the disagreement even clearer. The law worked in one regime but failed in another. Classical physics had no way to stop the runaway growth. To make this more concrete, imagine standing near a campfire. You feel the warmth on your skin because the fire radiates infrared light, which your skin absorbs as heat. You also see the flames glowing in red, orange, and yellow, which means the fire radiates visible light as well. But you do not feel streams of ultraviolet burning into your skin at lethal intensity. If the Rayleigh-Jeans law were correct all the way, that would happen. The fire would produce a deadly flood of short wavelength radiation. Yet fires are safe enough to sit near. This gap between prediction and reality forced scientists to look for a new idea. That new idea came from Max Planck in 1900. Planck assumed that energy could not vary smoothly across all values, but instead came in tiny chunks, which he called quanta. Each chunk was proportional to the frequency of the radiation. This was a bold step because it broke with centuries of belief in continuity. But Planck's assumption fit the data. When he derived a formula for blackbody radiation using quantized energy, the infinite growth at short wavelengths disappeared. The curve matched experiments at every frequency. The ultraviolet catastrophe was resolved, but at the cost of abandoning one of the core assumptions of classical physics. Planck did not at first believe quanta were real. He saw them as a mathematical trick. But within a few years, Einstein used the same idea to explain the photoelectric effect, showing that light sometimes behaves as if it is made of particles, later called photons. This gave quanta a firmer physical meaning. The ultraviolet catastrophe turned out not to be a glitch in the math, but a signal that classical physics was incomplete. To picture how drastic this was, consider another example. Imagine a guitar string that can vibrate at many frequencies. Classical physics says each frequency mode should get equal energy at a given temperature. If the same rule applied to blackbody radiation, then the higher the frequency, the more total energy should be present, since there are more ways to pack in higher frequencies. That leads straight to infinity. Planck's idea acts like a gatekeeper. To excite a higher frequency mode, you need to spend more energy at once. That makes short wavelengths harder to populate at moderate temperatures, which prevents the runaway effect. Instead of infinite energy, you get a distribution that fits the real world. This change was not easy for the scientific community to accept. Energy in discrete packets clashed with the smooth curves of classical theory. But experiment after experiment confirmed it. Without this shift, the physics of atoms, molecules, and light could not be explained. The ultraviolet catastrophe became a textbook example of how a failure in theory can reveal something deeper about nature. In practical terms, Planck's resolution explained why heated objects glow the way they do. It set the stage for technologies such as thermal cameras, incandescent bulbs, and eventually lasers and semiconductors. More broadly, It was the birth of quantum mechanics, which would go on to describe the structure of atoms, the behavior of materials, and the foundations of chemistry. What began as a paradox in a heated box turned into a revolution in physics. The phrase ultraviolet catastrophe has since taken on a symbolic meaning. It marks the point where old assumptions collapsed. Scientists could not explain a simple curve of heat and light using the best tools they had. They needed a new framework. Planck provided the seed of that framework, and others built on it. Today, the catastrophe is remembered not for the failure itself, but for the breakthrough it forced. The two envelopes paradox starts simply. You are offered two sealed envelopes. One contains twice as much money as the other. You choose one and are asked whether you want to switch. At first glance, switching always seems better. Suppose your envelope has X, then the other must hold either 2X or X positive. If you assign both options equal probability, the expected value of switching is half of 2X plus half of X positive, which comes to 5X over 4. That is more than X, so the argument says you should switch. But if that reasoning holds, it also applies after switching, and then again, and so on without end. That is why it is a paradox. The trick lies in how X is used. X is both the fixed amount in your hand and also treated as if it might be the smaller of the two. Mixing these roles leads to the false impression that switching increases value. The simple formula looks persuasive, but hides assumptions. If the envelopes contain $10 and $20, the situation is clear. If you pick $10, switching gives you $20. If you pick $20, switching drops you to $10. You have an even chance of going up or down, so the expected value of switching is the same as staying. No paradox appears once you see it this way. The real problem is that the puzzle never explains how the amounts are chosen. Without knowing the distribution, you cannot say the chance of the other envelope having 2X or X positive is equal. For instance, if there is a maximum possible amount, then seeing a large number makes it more likely that you are holding the bigger envelope. The neat 5X over 4 result ignores this. If instead we assume the smaller amount was chosen by some rule, then the conditional probabilities depend on that rule. When you work them out, the expectation of switching balances with the expectation of keeping. The sense of paradox comes from the symmetry. Before opening, both envelopes look the same. There is no reason to prefer one. But once you open and see a number, it feels like you should use that number to reason. That leads to labeling your amount X and imagining the other as 2X or X positive. It's this step that creates the illusion of gain. The situation is no different than choosing between two identical boxes, one with a red ball and one with a blue. The symmetry means switching changes nothing, but writing a formula disguises the symmetry. Numerical examples help. Suppose a host picks Y between 1 and 100 and fills the envelopes with Y and 2Y. If you open and see $60, either Y was 60, so the other has $120, or Y was 30, so the other has $30. But the two cases are not equally likely once you condition on what you saw. Bayes' theorem shows the odds are skewed by how Y was chosen. Once you do the correct calculation, switching and staying come out even. The paradox arises only if you assume equal chances without justification. The lesson is that probability calculations depend on a defined sample space. Treating X as both fixed and random at once blurs the sample space and creates contradictions. The paradox survives because the faulty reasoning is seductive. The formula 5X over 4 feels solid, but it is built on an unstated assumption that does not hold. With a proper distribution of amounts, the paradox fades. In some setups, expectation does not even exist, making the question of switching ill-posed. In bounded setups, the symmetry ensures no advantage either way. What you decide then depends not on expectation, but on how you value risk. Imagine the night sky as a vast field of stars. If that field had no edge, and if stars filled every direction, then your eyes would land on one no matter where you looked. Each far star would seem faint, but there would be so many that the total light would add up. In an eternal, unchanging cosmos, this sum would not stop. The whole sky would blaze like the surface of a star. Yet the sky is dark. This is Olbers Paradox. A simple picture makes the issue clear. Picture space as a set of shells around you. Each shell lies farther away than the last. Stars in a shell look dimmer with distance, since light spreads out, but each larger shell holds more stars. In a uniform universe, the extra stars in each shell cancel the dimming from distance. Every shell adds the same amount of light. With endless shells, the sum diverges. That is the paradox in one stroke. The clash does not come from tricky math. It comes from assumptions. The bright sky result needs a universe that is eternal, static, and filled with stars everywhere. It also assumes nothing blocks the view from each star to your eye. Compare these with what we know, and the dark sky makes sense. First, the universe has a finite age. Light has a finite speed. There is a horizon set by the product of age and speed, stretched by cosmic expansion. We can see only as far as light has had time to travel since the first stars formed. This alone breaks the infinite sum of shells. Beyond a certain distance, starlight has not arrived. The sum stops. Second, the universe expands. As space stretches, the wavelength of light stretches with it. This redshift lowers the energy of each photon and spreads their arrival times. The surface brightness of a distant source drops with the fourth power of 1 plus redshift, known as the Tolman test. In a static universe, brightness would not fade for a uniform sea of stars. In an expanding one, it fades fast. Distant galaxies add much less light than the shell model predicts. Third, stars have lifetimes. They are born, burn, and die. The rate of star birth peaked billions of years ago and has declined since. Most stars are small and faint. A few are bright but short-lived. The total light output per unit volume, the luminosity density, is finite. Integrated over cosmic history, the result is finite. The sky glows faintly, but not like a star. Some suggest dust as the answer. Dust does block starlight, but in an eternal universe, dust would not stay cold. Grains absorb energy, heat up, and glow. They would re-radiate the blocked light until the sky shone at the dust's temperature. Dust alone cannot solve the paradox. In our universe, dust does block and scatter visible light, but it re-radiates that energy in the infrared. We detect this as the cosmic infrared background. It moves energy out of visible light into longer wavelengths. This shifts light away from your eyes and helps explain the dark sky while leaving a faint glow elsewhere. The largest glow is the cosmic microwave background. It predates stars. It comes from when the universe first became transparent to radiation. Space has stretched those photons into the microwave band. They now bathe the sky at about 3 Kelvin. If you could see microwaves, the sky would shine everywhere. In visible light, your eyes sense almost none of it. The visible sky stays dark, even though the universe is filled with light. A simple analogy helps. Stand in a forest at night. Place candles 1 meter away, 2 meters, 3 meters, and so on without end. If all burn forever and the air stays clear, each ring of candles adds the same glow. The grove would blaze like day. Now change the scene. Let candles light at different times, with many not yet burning. Let the air fill with smoke that absorbs light and vents heat away. Let the ground move the candles apart so their flames stretch and cool into red embers. Now the total glow is finite. You see nearby candles, but not a wall of flame. The real sky is like this second scene. Add another detail. The universe is not packed with stars at every point. Most of space is empty. Stars live in galaxies. Galaxies gather in clusters and filaments, with vast voids between. This patchy layout means lines of sight cross dark regions. This helps, but the deeper causes are age and expansion. Even in a uniform cosmos, the horizon and redshift would cap the sum. Geometry and energy also matter. Brightness depends on how much energy a source emits and how that energy spreads. In an expanding universe, each burst of light is diluted 3 ways. Space grows, so photons spread out. Each photon loses energy to redshift, and the rate of photon arrival slows compared to the source's clock. These effects stop the sky from blowing up in brightness. They turn the infinite sum into a converging sum. This links to a simple formula. Think of the light you see as the integral over time of light production per unit volume, scaled by dimming factors. Production rises and falls with star birth and death. Dimming scales with expansion through a factor like 1/1 plus z to the 4th. The past is bright because galaxies were closer and stars formed fast, but redshift cancels the buildup. The integral converges. Observations match this picture. Deep images from telescopes show a dark sky dotted with discrete sources. Adding up their light gives a finite optical background. Infrared surveys show more power from dust and old stars. Microwave maps show a bright glow from early times. Surface brightness fades with redshift in line with the Tolman test. The star formation rate peaks in the past and falls toward now. Each piece of data supports the same answer. A common pushback asks why dust cannot be the whole story. The flaw is that energy does not vanish. Absorbed light heats dust until it glows. The universe would then shine at the dust's temperature. Our universe avoids this because it changes with time. Redshift drains energy into colder background radiation. Dust radiates at low temperatures, moving energy away from visible light. Another pushback asks whether a finite visible sky means a finite universe. It does not. Space may be infinite. The observable part is finite because of time and expansion. You live inside a finite past light cone. You see a finite number of galaxies and receive a finite flux. The rest lies beyond the horizon, not because it does not exist, but because light has not had time to reach you, and what does arrive has been stretched thin. Local effects play a role too. Airglow and zodiacal light from dust in the solar system add a faint veil. City lights add more. On a dark night far from towns, you still do not see a bright dome. You see the Milky Way as a band cut by dust lanes. That near view mirrors the larger reasons. Light sources are discrete and not thick enough to blend into a sheet, and the paths between them are not old or clear enough to flood your view. Olbers' name is tied to the paradox, but the puzzle was noted earlier. Modern physics resolves it. Finite age sets a horizon. Expansion redshifts and dilutes light. Star lifetimes and a changing birth rate limit the output. Dust shifts energy into other bands but cannot erase it. The night sky is dark because the universe does not match the old static model. Much light has slipped out of visible range, and the rest has had only limited time to arrive. Russell's paradox is one of the most famous problems in logic. It shows how a simple idea about sets leads straight into contradiction. At first, the setup looks harmless. A set is just a collection of things. You can have the set of all apples, or the set of all prime numbers, or the set of all chairs in a room. Sets can contain almost anything, even other sets. That freedom makes sets powerful, but it also opens the door to paradox. The paradox appears when we ask whether a set can contain itself as a member. Some sets clearly do not contain themselves. The set of all apples does not include itself, because the set itself is not an apple. The set of all cats does not include itself, because the set is not a cat. On the other hand, some sets do seem to contain themselves. The set of all abstract things could include itself, since a set is abstract. The set of all non-empty sets might contain itself, since it is a set and it is not empty. So the idea that a set may or may not contain itself is not strange. It depends on what the set is defined to include. Now imagine a special set, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. This definition sounds clear enough. To check whether a set belongs in it, you ask, does this set contain itself? If it does, then it is not in. If it does not, then it is in. That looks like a clean rule. But trouble comes when we ask, does this set contain itself? If it does contain itself, then by definition it should not contain itself. If it does not contain itself, then by definition it should contain itself. Either way, you reach a contradiction. The set cannot consistently be said to contain itself or not. That is the paradox. Put another way, call this set R. If R is a member of itself, then it must satisfy the condition of being a set that does not contain itself. That contradicts the assumption. If R is not a member of itself, then it satisfies the condition and should be included. Either choice collapses. The contradiction arises from the definition itself, not from any extra assumption. This was discovered by Bertrand Russell in 1901, and it shook the foundations of set theory. The paradox is easier to understand with an everyday analogy. Imagine a town with one barber. The barber shaves everyone in town who does not shave themselves, and only those people. Now ask, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then he is not allowed to, since he only shaves people who do not shave themselves. If he does not shave himself, then he must shave himself, since he shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. The rule collapses in contradiction. This is the Barber version of Russell's paradox. It shows how a simple self-referential rule can fail. Another analogy uses lists. Suppose you write down a list of all lists that do not list themselves. Now ask, should this list include itself? If it does, then it no longer qualifies, since it now lists itself. If it does not, then it should include itself, since it is a list that does not list itself. Again, the contradiction is built into the definition. These examples make clear that Russell's paradox is not a trick about symbols, but a real problem about how we define collections. Before Russell, mathematicians like Gottlob Frege believed that any definable collection formed a set. This was called naive set theory. It allowed you to take any property and gather all objects with that property into a set. For example, the property of being a prime number defines the set of all primes. The property of being an apple defines the set of all apples. The property of not containing itself defines the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. The last case shows why the approach fails. It produces a set that cannot exist without contradiction. Russell's paradox had deep consequences. Frege had just published his great work on the foundations of arithmetic when Russell wrote him about the paradox. Frege admitted that it destroyed the system he had built. Later, logicians developed new forms of set theory that avoided the paradox. One approach is to restrict comprehension, the principle that any property defines a set. Instead, only certain well-behaved properties are allowed. This avoids the dangerous self-referential definitions. Zermelo-Fraenkel's set theory, the standard system today, is built on this idea. In that system, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves cannot be formed. The rule that generated the paradox is excluded. The paradox also influenced philosophy. It shows how language and reference can break down when applied to themselves. Self-reference is powerful, but risky. The liar paradox, where someone says, "This statement is false," works the same way. If the statement is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. Russell's paradox is the set-theoretic cousin of the liar paradox. Both reveal the danger of definitions that turn back on themselves. Russell himself proposed a theory of types to handle this. In his system, sets are organized into levels. A set at one level can contain objects from lower levels, but not itself or its own level. This blocks self-membership and removes the paradox, though at the cost of complicating the theory. It helps to walk through concrete examples of sets and test whether they contain themselves. Consider the empty set, the set with nothing in it. Does it contain itself? No, because it has nothing inside. So the empty set does not contain itself. Therefore, it qualifies to be in the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Now consider the universal set, the set of all things. If such a set existed, it would contain itself because it contains everything. So it does not qualify. These checks look fine until you apply them to the set itself. Then the contradiction explodes. The paradox comes only at the self-referential point. One might wonder why this matters if we can simply say that the troublesome set does not exist. The problem is that naive set theory said it must exist because it satisfies the rule of comprehension. The paradox shows that the naive principle is too broad. It allows definitions that break the system. Without restrictions, set theory leads to contradiction, and from contradiction, everything becomes provable. That would destroy mathematics. So Russell's paradox forced a careful rebuild of the foundations. Imagine applying naive comprehension more broadly. You could define the set of all sets, the set of all things that are not numbers, the set of all sets that contain themselves, and so on. Each of these looks fine until you test them against themselves. The paradox shows that not all such sets can exist. There must be rules that block some of them. This is why modern set theory uses axioms to govern what sets exist. These axioms are chosen to avoid paradox while still allowing enough sets to do mathematics. Russell's paradox also reveals how slippery the idea of totality can be. When you talk about all sets or all collections, you risk creating a set that is too big or too self-involved to exist. The paradox shows that there is no universal set of everything, at least not within consistent set theory. There are always limits to what can be gathered into one collection. This idea has echoes in other areas, such as Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which show that no system can fully capture all truths about itself. Russell's paradox is an early sign of these limits. Another way to appreciate the paradox is to try to resolve it by brute force. Suppose we say the set of all sets that do not contain themselves does contain itself. Then by definition, it should not. So the assumption fails. Suppose we say it does not contain itself. Then by definition, it should. So the assumption fails. There is no consistent way to settle it. The paradox is not a puzzle you can solve by picking the right answer. It is a sign that the question itself is flawed. This is what makes it a paradox rather than just a tricky problem. The birthday paradox is a famous result in probability that seems unbelievable at first, but is straightforward once examined. It says that in a group of just 23 people, the chance that two share a birthday is greater than 50%. Most people assume the number must be much higher, perhaps 50 or 60, because we tend to think about others matching our own birthday. But the paradox asks whether any two people match each other, and that shift changes the outcome dramatically. Start with a year of 365 days, ignoring leap years. With two people, the probability that their birthdays are different is 364 out of 365. So the probability of a shared birthday is about 0.3%. That is very small. Add a third person. This person must avoid the first two birthdays. So the chance of all three being unique is 364 times 365 times 363 times 365, which equals about 99.2%. The chance of at least one shared birthday is therefore 0.8%. Still small, but it grows as the group grows. Add a fourth person. They must avoid 3 birthdays, giving 362 times 365. Multiply through and the chance of all unique birthdays becomes about 98.4%, leaving 1.6% for a match. With 5 people, the chance of no matches falls further. Every new person shrinks the pool of available days. By the time you reach 23 people, the probability of all birthdays being unique has fallen below 50%. So the probability of at least one match has risen above 50%. In other words, a group of 23 people is more likely than not to contain 2 who share a birthday. The paradox arises because our intuition misleads us. Most people imagine being in a room and asking, "What are the odds someone else here has my birthday?" In a room of 23, the chance of that is only about 6%. That feels small, but the paradox is not about you. It is about any 2 people in the group. With 23 people, there are 253 possible pairs. Each pair has only a small chance of matching, but with so many pairs, the overall chance becomes high. What feels unlikely on a personal level becomes likely once you consider all the possible comparisons. The principle shows up in many everyday situations. Suppose you flip a coin repeatedly. The chance of getting 5 heads in a row on any single try is only 1 in 32. But if you flip a coin a few hundred times, the chance of seeing such a run somewhere in the sequence is high. The number of opportunities multiplies, and that makes the rare event probable. The birthday paradox works the same way. Each pair of people is an opportunity for a match. The more opportunities you add, the more likely a coincidence becomes. A classroom example helps illustrate the point. Imagine 30 students. At first glance, 30 seems small compared to 365, so a shared birthday feels unlikely. But the math shows that the probability is about 70%. If you checked many classrooms, most would contain at least 1 pair of students with the same birthday. With 50 students, the probability rises to about 97%. At that point, a shared birthday is virtually certain. What seems like a rare coincidence becomes predictable once you frame it properly. The paradox has practical uses beyond classrooms. In cryptography, a related result called the birthday bound helps explain collisions in hash functions. A hash function maps inputs to a fixed size output space. If the number of outputs is n, then after about n inputs, the chance of 2 producing the same output becomes significant. This is known as the birthday problem in computer science. Consider a hash with 128-bit outputs. The total number of outputs is about 3.4 times 10 to the 38. That looks so large that collisions appear impossible. But the birthday principle shows that after about 2 to the 64 inputs, a collision is likely. That is far smaller than the full space, and this insight shapes how cryptographers design secure systems. Without the birthday paradox, the scale of collision risk would be easy to underestimate. Lotteries and random draws follow the same pattern. If 365 people each pick a day of the year, you might think you need that many to ensure overlap, but overlaps arrive much sooner. If numbers are drawn from 1 to 100, then with just 13 draws, the chance of a repeat passes 50%. With 30 draws, it climbs above 70%. The smaller the sample space, the faster overlaps occur. The birthday paradox is simply the most familiar version of this structure. The paradox also highlights how poorly human intuition handles probability. We think linearly, expecting chances to grow in proportion to group size. But the number of possible pairs grows quadratically. With each new person, the comparisons multiply much faster than most people imagine. By the time you have 23 people, The structure of the math makes coincidences more probable than not. This gap between how we feel about probability and what the numbers say is what makes the paradox so striking. Consider a company with 25 employees. At a lunch gathering, someone wonders if any two share a birthday. People compare dates, and in most cases, at least two will match. The group might treat it as a lucky coincidence, but the probability says otherwise. In fact, the odds favor it. The birthday paradox explains why coincidences that seem rare are actually common in groups. The same reasoning applies at parties, in sports teams, or in online communities. Wherever people gather, shared birthdays will appear more often than intuition alone suggests. Zeno's paradoxes ask what motion means. The best known are Achilles and the tortoise and the arrow in flight. Both use simple steps to raise a hard question. If a path or time can be split into endlessly smaller parts, how does motion ever finish? These puzzles feel fresh because they probe how we think about space, time, and change. Start with Achilles and the tortoise. The tortoise has a head start of 100 meters. Achilles runs at 10 meters per second. The tortoise moves at 5 meters per second. Achilles runs faster and should catch up. Zeno asks us to track the chase in stages. First, Achilles reaches the place where the tortoise began. That takes 10 seconds. In that time, the tortoise has moved 50 meters. Next, Achilles covers that 50 meters in 5 seconds. The tortoise crawls another 25 meters. Then Achilles runs those 25 meters in 2.5 seconds, while the tortoise gains 12.5. Each time Achilles arrives where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved on. The list of stages is endless: 100, 50, 25, 12.5, and so on. If all stages must be crossed, how can Achilles ever finish? Catching the tortoise seems to require infinitely many moves, so it looks like he never pulls even. Now check the numbers rather than the steps. The stage times form a geometric series: 10 plus 5 plus 2.5 plus 1.25 and ... Each term is half the previous. The series sums to 20 seconds. That matches the simple rule: catch time equals head start divided by speed gap, which is 100 divided by 10 minus 5 equals 20. The distance series also converges: 100 plus 50 plus 25 plus 12.5 and ... 200 meters. The 200-meter mark, both stand together. The infinite stages are one way to carve up a single motion, not extra tasks that add time. You can slice an interval into as many pieces as you like. The total stays the same. The key tool is the limit. When pieces shrink by a fixed ratio, their sum approaches a finite number. Achilles passes every marked point, but the shrinking times add to a finite total. The thought that infinite means never ends sneaks in because we picture a chore list that grows forever. But chores and limits are not the same. Suppose you cool tea by half the gap to room temperature each minute. After 1 minute, the gap is half. After 2 minutes, it is a quarter. After 3, it is an eighth. You never cut the gap to 0 if you treat each halving as a separate act. But the temperature reaches the room value in the limit. Achilles does not run as a series of rituals. He runs once along a path. The infinite partition lies in our description, not in his legs. Zeno's second story is the arrow. At any one instant, the arrow has one exact position. In that frozen slice, there is no change. If every instant is like that, and time is a stack of instants, then the arrow seems at rest at every instant, so it never moves. The force of the puzzle comes from the idea that motion must be found inside each instant. Yet an instant has no span in which to move. The modern answer uses the derivative. Instant velocity is not motion packed into a single instant. It is the limit of average velocities over shorter intervals around that instant. Take 2 times t and t plus h. Compute the average speed. Then let h shrink to 0. If the position function is smooth, that limit exists. The value is velocity at time t. You do not need the arrow to move during an instant. You need its position to vary when you compare instants. Motion lives in the relation between times, not in what happens within a point. Think of a video. A single frame shows no motion. Run many frames and motion appears. The effect is not hidden inside a frame. It is the relation across frames. Calculus makes that relation exact. The derivative dx over dt measures how x changes with t as the change grows small. That value can be non-zero even though each instant has 0 duration. Motion belongs to intervals, not to single instants. The Allais Paradox swaps those levels. Both paradoxes press on space and time as continuous. Zeno forces us to ask whether a line can contain endlessly many points and still have finite length, and whether time can contain endlessly many instants and still have finite duration. In mathematics, the answer is yes. A geometric series can converge. A function can have a derivative. With those tools, infinite partition does not block motion. Yet Zeno's push does not fade. It reminds us to state assumptions. We assume space and time are continua. We assume positions and times can be measured by real numbers. We assume bodies trace continuous paths, at least in classical physics. If deeper theory says space and time come in discrete units, details would change. But the core point remains. The count of parts does not settle motion. What matters is how parts add up. It helps to set the 2 stories side by side. Achilles shows that summing endless smaller gaps can yield a finite total. The arrow shows that motion depends on how positions vary near an instant, not on squeezing movement into one instant. Together, they clear 2 traps, mistaking an infinite list for an endless task and mistaking a snapshot for the whole of change. Try another Achilles run. Suppose the tortoise has a 200-meter lead. Achilles runs at 12 meters per second. The tortoise runs at 3 meters per second. The speed gap is 9 meters per second. The catch time is 200 divided by 9 equals 22.2 seconds. The stage times form 16.7, 4.2, 1.0, 0.24, and so on. Their sum tends toward 22.2 seconds. The stage distances form 200, 50, 12.5, 3.125, and so on, tending to 266.6 meters. There is no puzzle in the total. The series converges because the ratio is less than 1. If you plot partial sums, they approach the catch value. The list has no last term, but the sum has a limit. Achilles reaches the tortoise within half a minute. The arrow allows a formula check. Take x of t equals vt, the position at constant speed v. At any time, dx over dt equals v. At each instant, the arrow has a fixed position, yet the slope of the position function is non-zero. That slope is velocity. Or take x of t equals ha squared, position under constant acceleration a. Then, velocity is at. At t equals 1, speed is a. At t equals 0, speed is 0, but it grows after. The arrow is not frozen because we look at a slice. Motion is the pattern across slices. The derivative captures it. Zeno's style also hints at supertasks, jobs needing infinitely many things. Turning a knob by half the remaining turn, then half again, looks unending. Yet the knob reaches the stop because the total turn has a finite limit. Again, the partition lies in our head. The physical act is one motion with a finite time. You can insert markers at halves, quarters, eighths. Passing them does not add time. For a check, watch a sprinter chase a slower runner. Coaches mark splits every 10 meters. The chaser crosses each mark quicker because the speed gap erases the lead at a steady rate. The list of marks can be long, but the pass still happens in short time. Marks do not slow legs. Some ask whether infinite points confuses math with physics. A line has unending points, but matter may not follow that structure at small scales. Yet motion in the lab matches calculus. Projectiles trace smooth curves. Clocks match sums and limits. Engineering rests on that match. For scales we use to run and build, the continuum model works. Zeno's paradoxes have force because they strip motion to its bones and twist how we describe it. They expose where careless language makes infinite sound like impossible, and where snapshots hide change. The tools that answer them, limits, convergent series, instantaneous velocity, are core parts of calculus. The questions still guide us. They keep us alert to the gap between how we define the world and how the world carries on. Picture a sealed vault that holds every book in a library. You drop the vault into a black hole. The mass of the hole rises, but from the outside, the hole looks the same as any other hole with that mass, spin, and charge. The books vanish from view. The question is whether the information in those pages still exists in some form, or whether it disappears from the universe. That is the black hole information paradox. It sits at the meeting point of relativity, thermodynamics, and quantum mechanics, and it forces us to ask what we mean by information in a physical sense. A black hole is defined by its event horizon. Cross that boundary, and no signal can escape to distant observers. Relativity says a stationary black hole in empty space is featureless from the outside. This is the no-hair theorem. The exterior only knows mass, charge, and spin. If the outside cannot sense what fell in, the pathway for information to return seems blocked. In the 1970s, Jacob Bekenstein argued that black holes carry entropy, a measure of missing information proportional to the area of the horizon. Stephen Hawking then showed that quantum effects make black holes radiate with a temperature set by surface gravity. This Hawking radiation comes out in a thermal spectrum, like heat from a stove. The hole cools by emitting particles, loses mass, and can evaporate. Here lies the paradox. Quantum mechanics says closed systems evolve unitarily, preserving information. If a hole begins in a pure quantum state and evaporates into purely thermal radiation, the final state looks mixed. That breaks unitarity. If instead information escapes, the radiation must carry subtle correlations. Hawking's original calculation found none. General relativity points to hidden or lost information, while quantum theory demands its survival. Consider burning a book. In air, the information spreads into smoke, light, and heat, and in principle could be reconstructed. Throw the same book into a black hole, and the outside observer sees the hole's parameters change. Then only thermal radiation emerge. If that radiation encodes no trace of the book, the final state has lost information. That is the heart of the paradox. Hawking's picture relies on particle pairs across the horizon. One escapes as radiation. The other falls in with negative energy and reduces the hole's mass. They are entangled. As radiation accumulates, exterior partners are entangled with interior partners. If the hole evaporates completely, the interior partners vanish. The outside quanta lose their mates, breaking entanglement in a way not allowed in normal quantum evolution. Don Page asked how the entropy of the radiation should behave if evaporation is unitary. Early on, radiation looks thermal and entropy rises. After about half the evaporation, called the Page time, entropy must decline towards zero at the end. This page curve rises, then falls. Hawking's calculation gives a curve that only rises. Something in the semi-classical picture must change around the page time. Several options exist. One says information is destroyed. That alters quantum mechanics and creates inconsistencies. Another says the whole leaves a remnant storing the information, but such remnants would need vast internal states, leading to instabilities. A third says information escapes in the radiation through correlations not seen in Hawking's approximation. That view preserves unitarity, but requires the horizon region to differ from a simple vacuum. Black hole complementarity frames it differently. It says no single observer can access both the smooth horizon and the detailed radiation. An outside observer can treat the horizon as a membrane that scrambles and re-emits information. An infalling observer crosses smoothly. The two views cannot be joined into one global picture, but each remains consistent. This protects unitarity and the equivalence principle. The firewall paradox challenged this view. If late Hawking quanta must be entangled with early radiation to purify the state, they cannot also be entangled with interior partners, because entanglement cannot be maximal with two systems at once. If outside correlations dominate, interior entanglement breaks. That implies a violent firewall at the horizon, contradicting relativity's smooth passage. The paradox sharpened the puzzle of where partner modes live. Another idea is soft hair. Black holes may carry subtle charges tied to large gauge symmetries. These could store details of what fell in and affect radiation. Whether this encodes enough to resolve the paradox is still debated. Progress came from quantum gravity tools for computing entanglement entropy. Using path integrals and island formulas for quantum extremal surfaces, several groups reproduced the page curve in setups with evaporating holes coupled to a bath. After the page time, the region used to compute radiation entropy includes an island inside the black hole. Including the island reduces entropy in the right way. The math matches unitarity. It does not reveal the microscopic mechanism, but shows that with correct bookkeeping for entanglement, semi-classical gravity yields the unitary page curve. The ADS-CFT correspondence also supports unitarity. It maps gravity in negatively curved space to a quantum field theory on the boundary. The boundary theory evolves unitarily. A black hole in the bulk corresponds to a hot state in the boundary. Since the boundary keeps information, so must the bulk. The mapping is exact, offering proof that black hole evaporation in that setting is unitary. How information emerges involves dynamics and complexity. Black holes scramble information quickly. The Hayden and Preskill thought experiment asks what happens when you toss a diary into an old black hole past the page time. They found the diary's information starts leaking out after a scrambling time that scales like the logarithm of the hole's entropy. In principle, someone who has all the early radiation and collects enough new radiation can reconstruct the diary. In practice, decoding requires astronomical computational resources. The laws permit recovery. But realistic observers cannot achieve it. Timescales matter. A stellar black hole has a Hawking temperature far below the cosmic microwave background and gains mass instead of evaporating. Its full evaporation time is far longer than the age of the universe. Only tiny holes would evaporate on human timescales, but none are known. The paradox is not an experimental issue, but a consistency test of theory. Analog systems, like horizons in fluids or optical setups, mimic some features of Hawking radiation and suggest that thermal behavior can coexist with coherence. Return to the vault of books. The horizon is not a blank wall. The quantum state near it encodes and scrambles incoming information. early radiation looks thermal. But after the page time, subtle correlations grow between new quanta and earlier ones. Controlled models reproduce this transition and match unitary expectations. Complementarity preserves smooth infall for each observer. Complexity explains why practical decoding is hopeless, even though the data is there in principle. The paradox forced physics to link geometry, entropy, and entanglement in one narrative, and that narrative continues to shape what we mean by information in a universe with gravity. The Ellsberg Paradox is a puzzle in decision theory that shows how people handle uncertainty. Daniel Ellsberg described it in 1961, and it demonstrates that people prefer known risks over unknown ones, a tendency called ambiguity aversion. It challenges the traditional view in economics that people follow expected utility theory, which assumes choices are made by weighing outcomes and probabilities in a consistent way. The paradox is not just a technical flaw in theory. It highlights how people think about risk, ignorance, and fairness, and why human decisions often defy mathematical models. The setup is simple. Imagine an urn with 90 balls. 30 of the balls are red. The remaining 60 are a mix of black and yellow, but you do not know in what proportion. It could be all black, all yellow, or any combination between. You are offered a bet. If you draw a red ball, you win $100. Most people accept this bet. They know there are 30 red balls, so the chance of winning is 1/3. The risk is clear. Now consider a second bet. You win $100 if you draw a black ball. This time, the odds are uncertain. The number of black balls could be anywhere from 0 to 60. If there are 60, your chance of winning is 2/3. If there are none, it is 0. Most people reject this bet. Even though the expected value might be higher than the red bet, they dislike the uncertainty about the odds. The paradox becomes sharper when choices are compared. First, do you prefer betting on red or on black? Most people choose red. Then, do you prefer betting on red or yellow, or betting on black or yellow? Here, most people prefer black or yellow, even though they earlier avoided black. The pattern violates expected utility theory, which predicts consistent preferences. The contradiction reveals the role of ambiguity aversion. To see why, imagine what strict theory predicts. If you reject black in favor of red, you act as though the chance of black is less than 1/3. That would mean the chance of yellow is greater than 1/3, since black plus yellow must equal 2/3. In that case, you should later prefer red or yellow over black or yellow. But most people reverse their choice. This inconsistency shows that people are not only responding to probabilities, but also to the structure of the uncertainty. One way to make sense of this is to say people dislike ambiguity itself. They would rather face a known risk than an unknown one. The red bet is risky but clear. The black bet is clouded by ignorance. People shy away from the ambiguous option, even when it could be better. This is why the paradox matters. It shows that ambiguity itself shapes choices. To bring the paradox into everyday life, consider investing. You can buy a government bond with a guaranteed return of 2%, or invest in a new technology company with an uncertain future. The bond is like the red bet. The risk is clear. The tech company is like the black bet. The odds are unknown. Many investors avoid the ambiguous option, even if it might yield more. They prefer clarity over uncertainty. Insurance offers another example. People often pay more than the expected loss to cover risks. The premium buys not only protection, but also certainty. They know what they face. The paradox helps explain why insurance markets thrive, even when prices are not favorable in strict mathematical terms. People dislike ambiguity so much that they pay to avoid it. Ellsberg's paradox also appears in politics and law. Voters often prefer policies with clear outcomes over those with uncertain effects, even if the uncertain option might yield better results. In courts, jurors may favor evidence that looks certain even when ambiguous evidence could be more accurate. Ambiguity aversion shapes behavior where trust and responsibility are at stake as much as money. Philosophers and economists have tried to explain why ambiguity aversion arises. Some argue it is rational in a world where probabilities are not always well defined. If you cannot know the odds, it makes sense to guard against the worst case. This is called the max-min rule. You act as if the worst possible distribution is real. Others argue that ambiguity aversion is psychological. People feel uneasy with gaps in knowledge, and that unease drives their choices. Either way, the paradox highlights a gap between what theory predicts and what human behavior shows. To see how strong the effect can be, imagine two lotteries. In one, you flip a coin. If it lands heads, you win $100. If tails, nothing. In the other, you draw from an urn of 100 balls in some unknown mix of red and blue. You win $100 if you draw red. Most people choose the coin toss, even though the chance of red might also be 50%. The key difference is that the coin is transparent. The odds are known. The urn hides the proportions, and that ambiguity pushes people away. They prefer the clarity of the coin flip. This preference for known risks has wide consequences. In business, managers often choose projects with predictable outcomes, even when more uncertain projects could return more. In medicine, patients prefer treatments with well-documented results, even if experimental options offer higher chances of success. In daily life, people stick with familiar routines rather than explore paths clouded by uncertainty. The paradox captures this pattern in a clear, simple experiment. The Ellsberg Paradox also links to deeper questions in probability. Classical probability theory assumes that every uncertain situation can be assigned exact numbers. But in real life, many situations do not come with clear odds. When probabilities are ambiguous, expected utility theory struggles. The paradox suggests that a richer model is needed, one that accounts for ambiguity as well as risk. Prospect theory and models of subjective probability try to capture this. They allow for the fact that people treat known and unknown risks differently. The paradox was one of the sparks that pushed researchers to move beyond simple models of rational choice. What makes the Ellsberg Paradox so enduring is its simplicity. Just an urn, some balls, and a pair of bets are enough to reveal a deep feature of human behavior. People are not only risk-averse, but ambiguity-averse. They want not only favorable odds, but also clear ones. They avoid situations where the distribution is unknown, even if those situations might turn out better. The paradox shows how strongly people prefer clarity over ignorance, and how this preference bends choices away from strict mathematical consistency. Imagine a small town with a single barber. The town council posts a rule on the shop door. The barber shaves every man in town who does not shave himself, and only those men. People stop and read the sign. Someone asks a simple question: does the barber shave himself? If he does, then he should not, because the rule says he shaves only those who do not shave themselves. If he does not, then he must, because the rule says he shaves every man who does not shave himself. Either way leads to trouble. The rule defeats itself and the town's neat arrangement collapses. This is the Barber Paradox. It is a striking example of self-reference leading to contradiction. The loop may look like a clever word game, but it exposes a serious flaw in how we define sets and rules. Bertrand Russell used a similar idea to reveal a hole in what was once called naive set theory. In that older view, you could form a set from any property you liked. Take all things with a trait and gather them. Russell asked about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. If the set contains itself, then it should not, by definition. If it does not, then it must contain itself. This circular trap is the same shape as the barber's dilemma. The barber stands in for the set. Shaves takes the place of contains. Either way, the rule loops back and cancels itself. We can write the barber's rule more formally. Let the people in town form the domain. Use the predicate shaves xy to mean x shaves y. Let B be the barber. The door sign says that for every person y, shaves B, y holds if and only if not shaves y. Now put y equal to B. The rule says shaves B, B if and only if not shaves B. That means this statement is true if and only if it is false. Such a condition is impossible. No model can satisfy it. The paradox shows that the definition itself is inconsistent. The neat story about the barber describes nothing real. Some people try to escape the loop with storytelling tricks. They say the barber might be a woman, or that he lives outside town, or perhaps he uses a machine to deal with his own beard. These fixes work by changing the domain or altering the rule. You can avoid the loop by forbidding the barber from shaving himself at all. Then the clause y equals b never arises and the rule is safe. But that is not the original definition. The paradox insists that the definition as stated cannot be fulfilled. It is not shaving that is flawed. It is the logic of the rule. The lesson connects directly to sets. Naive set theory once said, for any property Px, there exists a set S equals X Px. If you allow Px equals X naught in X, you create Russell's set and the same loop as the barber. The fix was to restrict which sets can exist. Modern set theory, like Zermelo-Fraenkel, ZF, does not allow a set formed from all things with a given property. It only permits subsets carved out of an existing set. This avoids the trap. Another repair is type theory. It places objects into levels. A set can contain objects of lower type, but not itself. That prevents self-membership. Both approaches acknowledge that careless self-reference is dangerous, so rules must be tightened. We can think of the barber as a logical device. The device enforces one law. He shaves you if and only if you do not shave yourself. Feed the barber himself into the device and the output flips state. True becomes false and false becomes true. The device cannot stabilize. It is like building a switch that flips itself whenever it is on and flips itself again when it is off. There is no position that works. The paradox is a wiring fault in the rule itself. A well-known cousin is the liar sentence. This sentence is false. If it is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. The same circular loop appears. Alfred Tarski's solution was to build levels of language. A sentence in one language cannot declare itself true or false. Only a higher metalanguage can evaluate truth for the level below. That band stops the loop. The barber rule needs the same kind of boundary. If the barber can shave everyone except those whose shaving defines his own case, the loop disappears. But then the original rule is gone. A finite example makes this visible. Suppose the town has 3 men, Al, Bo, and Cal. Each either shaves himself or not. Let Al be the barber. The rule says Al shaves Bo if and only if Bo does not shave himself, and the same for Cal. That works, but when we apply the rule to Al himself, we hit the impossible line again. Shaves Al if and only if not shaves al. Any attempt to assign shaving duties collapses. A truth table will show that every row fails at the self case. No consistent pattern exists once the barber is subject to his own rule. Another view uses graphs. Draw an arrow from X to Y when X shaves Y. The Barber rule says that from B, there is an arrow to each Y that lacks a loop at Y. But when Y equals B, the rule says B must both have and not have a loop. The diagram cannot be drawn without contradiction. The only cure is to forbid the self-loop altogether, which is a change to the rule. Why do such loops appeal to us? Because neat definitions tempt the mind. The barber shaves those who do not shave themselves, looks clean, dividing the world into two groups. But when the cutter is caught inside the cut, the slice doubles back. The same risk shows up in computing and policy. A recursive function with no base case collapses into infinite calls. A policy that grants access only if access is denied cancels itself. A database rule that references itself without limit can erase its own logic. The remedy is to mark the boundary. Never let the rule swallow itself unless you have safeguards. In logic, the tool to expose this is proof by contradiction. Assume the barber exists as described. Derive that shaves BB if and only if not shaves BB. Conclude the assumption is impossible. Therefore, such a barber cannot exist. The paradox does not leave the question open. It states there is no way to satisfy the rule. The world described by the story is empty. This insight matters for formal systems. Naive comprehension looked safe until Russell's paradox showed that some definitions produce nothing real. The fix was not to abandon sets, but to regulate how they are built. Modern axioms provide plenty of sets for all normal mathematics while blocking the dangerous ones. The barber is a reminder that careless rules can void themselves. Good foundations must guard against that. Think of the barber as a filter. He lets through exactly those not caught by their own filters. When he tests himself, he asks, "Do I let myself through if and only if I do not let myself through?" The question defeats itself. That is the sign of a self-negating rule. Any definition that forces an object to both belong and not belong to a class by the same condition cannot stand. The Barber Paradox is short, but its reach is long. It trains us to notice when a rule refers to itself in ways that cancel out. It shows that plain sentences can hide logical traps. It warns that some attractive arrangements cannot describe any world at all. And it links a simple, everyday image, a haircut, to the deepest structures of sets, types, and truth, where the form of a definition can decide whether an entire theory holds or collapses. Schrödinger's cat is one of the most famous thought experiments in physics. It was proposed in 1935 by the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger to highlight the strangeness of quantum mechanics. The idea is simple enough to picture, yet it reveals how quantum theory challenges common sense. At its core, the experiment describes a cat that is both alive and dead at the same time, until someone opens a box and looks inside. This paradoxical state is not meant as a literal suggestion about cats, but as a way of showing how the rules of quantum physics collide with everyday experience. Quantum mechanics describes the behavior of very small particles such as electrons, photons, and atoms. One of its key features is superposition. A quantum system can exist in multiple possible states at once until it is measured. For example, an electron can be in two places at the same time, or a photon can pass through two paths in an experiment at once. Only when we measure the system do we find a single outcome. The rules of probability work perfectly in this domain, but they clash with how we understand macroscopic objects like tables, people, or cats. Schrödinger designed his thought experiment to expose this clash. The setup is straightforward. Imagine a sealed box. Inside the box sits a cat, along with a small device that contains a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, a vial of poison, and a hammer. The atom has a 50% chance of decaying within an hour. If it decays, the Geiger counter detects the radiation, which triggers the hammer to break the vial, releasing poison and killing the cat. If the atom does not decay, the vial remains intact and the cat lives. According to quantum mechanics, before observation, the atom exists in a superposition of decayed and not decayed. If that is the case, then the mechanism is in a superposition of triggered and not triggered, and the cat is in a superposition of alive and dead. From the outside, before opening the box, the rules of quantum mechanics seem to imply that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. Only when an observer opens the box and looks does the superposition collapse into one definite state. This is the paradox. We can accept superposition at the level of atoms or photons, but applying it to a living cat makes the strangeness visible. Schrödinger's point was not that cats really exist in such states, but that the interpretation of quantum mechanics must be clarified. The paradox arises from what is called the measurement problem. In quantum mechanics, the evolution of a system is described by a wave function. The wave function contains all possible outcomes and their probabilities. It evolves smoothly and deterministically until a measurement occurs. At that point, the wave function appears to collapse to one definite outcome. The question is, what counts as a measurement? Is it the Geiger counter detecting the atom's decay? Is it the release of poison? Or does collapse only occur when a human observer looks inside the box? Schrödinger's cat dramatizes this question by placing the boundary between quantum and classical worlds in doubt. One way to interpret the paradox is through the Copenhagen interpretation, which was dominant at the time. According to this view, the wave function is a tool for predicting probabilities. Before observation, the cat's state is not determined. Once an observer opens the box, the wave function collapses, and the cat is either alive or dead. The problem with this view is that it leaves the role of the observer mysterious. It suggests that consciousness plays a part in determining reality, which troubled many physicists, including Schrödinger. Another interpretation is the many worlds view. This was introduced later in the 1950s by Hugh Everett. According to many worlds, the wave function never collapses. Instead, when the atom decays, the universe splits. In one branch, the cat is alive. In another, the cat is dead. Both outcomes exist in parallel worlds, and the observer becomes part of the split as well. From the perspective of the person who opens the box, only one outcome is seen, but both exist in reality. This interpretation removes the need for collapse, but raises questions about the existence of countless parallel universes. There are also interpretations that emphasize the role of decoherence. In this view, the cat is never in a genuine superposition at the level of experience. The interaction of the atom with the Geiger counter, the poison, and the environment causes the quantum superposition to spread out and become entangled with everything around it. For practical purposes, the cat behaves as if it is already either alive or dead, long before anyone opens the box. Decoherence explains why we never see superpositions in daily life, even though they exist at the microscopic level. The thought experiment continues to spark debate because it reveals the limits of our intuition. Consider how different it feels to think about the atom and the cat. For the atom, being in a superposition of decayed and not decayed seems abstract but not impossible. For the cat, being in a superposition of alive and dead seems absurd. Yet the rules of quantum mechanics make no distinction between atoms and cats. Schrödinger wanted to show that the boundary between the quantum and classical worlds is not clear. The paradox has inspired many examples in popular culture. Science fiction often uses Schrödinger's cat as a symbol for uncertainty, duality, or hidden outcomes. In detective stories, it serves as a metaphor for a suspect who is both guilty and innocent until proven otherwise. In philosophy, it raises questions about reality, observation, and knowledge. The image of the cat, both alive and dead in the box, has become a shorthand for situations where outcomes remain unresolved until revealed. To understand the power of the paradox, consider a simpler analogy. Imagine flipping a coin and covering it before anyone looks. The coin is either heads or tails, even if you do not know which. In classical terms, the coin has a definite state, hidden but real. In quantum mechanics, by contrast, the atom is not in one definite state until measured. It is in both possibilities at once. The cat illustrates what happens when we extend this reasoning into the macroscopic world. Unlike the coin, the cat is not just hidden. It is entangled with the quantum event itself. Physicists have created experiments with particles that mimic the logic of Schrödinger's cat. For instance, they can prepare atoms or photons in superpositions of states and maintain them for measurable times. Some laboratories have even built systems called Schrödinger's cat states, in which larger objects, like molecules or superconducting circuits, exist in superpositions. These experiments do not put cats at risk, but explore how quantum rules scale. They confirm that superposition is real, though how it connects to everyday objects is still debated. The paradox also connects to deeper philosophical issues about reality. Is the wave function a physical thing, or just a mathematical tool? Does observation create outcomes, or merely reveal them? If many worlds is right, then every possible outcome of every event exists in some branch of reality. If decoherence is right, then the superpositions are washed out by the environment before we notice them. Each interpretation has strengths and weaknesses, and none has been universally accepted. Schrödinger's cat remains central because it forces us to confront these questions in a vivid way. A cat both alive and dead captures the tension between the strange rules of quantum physics and the everyday world we experience. It shows that while quantum mechanics works flawlessly in practice, its meaning remains unsettled. The arrow of time paradox is one of the deepest puzzles in physics. It asks why time seems to flow in one direction, even though the basic laws of physics work the same forward and backward. When you watch a glass fall from a table and shatter, the sequence looks natural. If you play the video backward, the shards suddenly leap together and the glass reassembles. The backward version feels wrong. Yet the equations that govern the motion of the glass and the air molecules are reversible. They do not care whether time moves forward or backward. This tension between the reversible laws of physics and the irreversible experience of time is the arrow of time paradox. At the level of Newton's mechanics, the puzzle is clear. If you know the position and velocity of every particle in a system at a given time, you can predict their behavior both forward and backward. The mathematics allows for both. In principle, if you reversed all the velocities, the system would trace its steps back perfectly. That means the falling glass could reassemble, the spilled coffee could climb back into its cup, and the smoke could gather back into a cigar. Yet, in practice, we never see this. Time seems to have a built-in direction. The same is true in quantum mechanics. The equations that describe wave functions are symmetric in time. A quantum system can evolve forward or backward according to the Schrödinger equation. Nothing in the math forbids it. But our experience of time is not symmetric. We remember the past, not the future. We grow older, not younger. Stars burn their fuel and do not spontaneously refill with hydrogen. The world seems to run along one track. The paradox is that physics does not select a direction, but the universe we observe clearly does. To make sense of this, physicists often turn to thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy, a measure of disorder, tends to increase in an isolated system. Entropy is low when systems are ordered, like when all the air molecules are squeezed into one corner of a room. Entropy is high when the molecules are spread evenly. The second law says the direction of time is the direction of increasing entropy. When the glass shatters, entropy rises. When coffee cools, entropy rises. These processes are irreversible because they move from order to disorder. But this explanation raises another question. Why was entropy lower in the past? If time is defined by the increase of entropy, then the arrow of time depends on an initial condition. The universe must have started in a very low entropy state for the second law to work. Otherwise, entropy would already be at its maximum, and no arrow of time would appear. This brings the paradox to cosmology. Why was the early universe so ordered? The laws of physics allow for high entropy states, and in fact, those are far more likely. Yet the universe began smooth, hot, and low in entropy, setting the stage for the arrow of time we see today. One way to grasp the paradox is with dice. Imagine throwing a cup of dice onto a table. Most of the time, the dice scatter randomly. Rarely, they all land showing the same number. If you film the dice landing with all sixes and play it backward, the backward version is just as possible by the laws of physics. But in practice, the forward scattering is far more likely. The backward gathering into perfect order is so unlikely that you never expect to see it. This difference in probability creates the arrow of time, but it is only probability. The laws themselves do not forbid reversals, they only make them astronomically improbable. Another way to picture entropy is through mixing. Imagine you have a glass divided into two halves by a barrier. On one side is blue liquid, on the other, yellow. When you pull away the barrier, the colors swirl together until the glass is green. The molecules never spontaneously separate back into neat halves of blue and yellow. Yet nothing in the underlying physics prevents that reversal. It is simply so improbable that it does not happen. The arrow of time is tied to this overwhelming imbalance between likely and unlikely. This raises a philosophical issue. Is the arrow of time fundamental, or is it just a matter of perspective? Some physicists argue that time's direction is not written into the laws of physics, but emerges from statistics and boundary conditions. Others argue that the very fact of our memory, perception, and causation depends on the entropy gradient. We can remember the past because traces of it exist in low entropy structures, like photographs or brain states. We cannot remember the future because those structures do not exist yet. The arrow of time is built into our cognition as much as into physics. The paradox also links to cosmology. The universe began in a hot, dense state with low entropy. As it expanded, structures like stars and galaxies formed, and entropy rose. The second law plays out on a cosmic scale. If the universe had started in maximum entropy, it would have been a uniform soup with no stars, no planets, and no observers. The fact that entropy was low at the start is a mystery. Why the early universe was so ordered remains one of the deepest questions in physics. black holes add another dimension to the puzzle. According to Stephen Hawking's work, black holes have entropy proportional to the area of their event horizons. When matter falls in, entropy increases. Black holes can evaporate through Hawking radiation, spreading entropy even further. This makes black holes the most entropic objects in the universe. Their behavior shows how deeply entropy is tied to the arrow of time. Once information falls into a black hole, recovering it in perfect detail looks impossible. The process has a direction. Even at the human scale, the paradox shapes our lives. You can drop sugar into coffee, and it dissolves. You never see the coffee spontaneously separate out sugar crystals. You can remember what you ate for breakfast, but not what you will eat tomorrow. The arrow of time runs through every ordinary event. Yet when we write down the equations of motion, the arrow disappears. Mathematics allows both directions. The mystery lies in why one is realized and not the other. Some have tried to resolve the paradox by proposing that time may flow differently at the deepest level. Quantum gravity, the attempt to unite general relativity with quantum mechanics, may require a new understanding of time. In some approaches, time is not fundamental but emergent. The arrow we see could arise from the way complex systems behave, not from the basic rules. Others argue that the asymmetry of time is set once and for all by the conditions of the Big Bang. However elegant the math, we must accept that the universe began in a special state. The arrow of time paradox shows how physics and experience collide. At the level of equations, time is reversible. At the level of lived reality, time moves forward and never back. Entropy explains the pattern, but entropy itself depends on an unexplained boundary condition. The paradox remains not because physics is inconsistent, but because it leaves open the question of why the universe is arranged in a way that gives time its direction.